Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
For reasons I won't go into, I had to up sticks and leave the city I'd lived and worked in for over 10 years. I can't say I was too happy about this, but needs must, as the saying has it. In a fit of pique, I decided that, if I was going to have to move anyway, it might as well be as far away from where I was as it could reasonably be. It couldn't be a little village in the back of beyond, though I was tempted, as I needed to work and there's not much call for my skills in a little village. On top of that, I was a city person at heart, and the thought of spending the long evenings engaged in lively philosophical discussions about, or maybe with, sheep was not one that filled me with enthusiasm. I had the choice of East Coast or West. I chose the East. The next tasks were to find somewhere to stay, and something to do. Finding somewhere to stay proved to be relatively easy. I simply phoned round various letting agencies until I was offered a short-term lease on the right-sized property at a rent I didn't think was extortionate. As it happened, I was choosing the right time of year to move. In 3 or 4 months, IDV paid over twice as much as the tourist season got into full swing. Finding a job was less easy. Not that there was a dearth of them. It was more about the terms and conditions rather than the actual job. I could have applied for a full-time vacancy, but I didn't want to be tied down. After all, I might hate the place and want to move on. Freelance was the answer, and, here again, I had choices. I could either sign with a large national agency or a small local one. Large agencies with well-known names were much safer. They ran things by the book, and you knew you would be paid at the end of the month. The downside was that clients tended to bulk buy, so you could end up in a team of half a dozen or more slogging away to meet some deadline that had been drawn in the sand by the MD or whoever after he'd had too many G&Ts at some business dinner. Smaller agencies tended to be more personal. The good ones often had more interesting assignments and looked after their people better. The bad ones just screwed everybody around. The problem was that, unless you knew the scene, you couldn't tell which was which. I chose a smaller agency. I had a number of reasons for this. If they turned out to be crap, I wasn't really in any worse a position than I was just now. If they were good, then at least I stood a chance of enjoying the assignments. I made my choice on gut instinct. They did have some good clients, and the work sounded interesting, but the main factor was the voice of the woman on the phone. She came across as honest and genuinely interested in signing me up. I had all the usual hassles with packing and storage and lawyers and the gas board and the phone company and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, but eventually, I was on my way north. I picked up the keys from the letting agent and, after a few wrong turnings, found the flat. It wasn't quite what I'd expected from the particulars. Funny how agents' descriptions never quite matched the real thing, though you couldn't ever accuse them of out-and-out lying. It was comfortable enough, I suppose, but it was small. An almost square box divided into 3 rooms, kitchen and bathroom by partitions, 2 layers of plasterboard, rather than proper walls. Still, it was only for 3 months. I had a settling-in day, then I had to report to my first client. As I'd acquired a local AZ, I didn't have any trouble finding the place. The job turned out to be exactly as described. The people were friendly and let me get on with my work without undue interference. I made a couple of tentative inquiries about the agency and was given a big thumbs up. That was a relief, for it meant I stood a good chance of getting paid. The month whizzed past. Unlike some bigger companies, this one was grateful for the assistance provided by outsiders, and I was included in all the usual social activities, both inside and outside work. In fact, a couple of the staff, learning I was a heathen from the South, took it upon themselves to remedy the sad lack in my education regarding the many benefits and proud history of their city. People like that can be a bore, but, as a new boy, I was grateful for their input, especially as it was done in a light-hearted manner. Another effect of being a new boy was that I went out of my way to be helpful even in areas that weren't really my concern. If this agency was as good as the company believed, I wanted a good report to go back to them. If I got my feet under the table, I would be well set for future work. We parted with genuine regret. I think I did a good job. No, I know I did a good job. I know I did a good job as, the next day, I had a phone call from the agency telling me so. They also asked me a favor. I'd been scheduled to go to another small company in a nearby town for the next 2 weeks. However, one of their star people had been involved in a car accident, so they were short of a body to do some work for a major client in the city. Could I, possibly, help them out? Now I can smell a con when I hear one. I don't mean they were lying. The poor bugger probably really had been in an accident and was in hospital with his leg in plaster or even worse, but it was clear they weren't giving me the whole story. The clincher was when they offered me more money. I was tempted to tell them to piss off. I was new and I didn't owe them any loyalty, but I said yes. I don't know why. The job turned out to be as bad as I'd suspected. For a start, the company was large and bureaucratic. They had their own way of doing things, a way that bore no resemblance to any generally accepted standards, and we're adamant we work that way. It's not my favorite way of working. With non-standard procedures, you waste a fair amount of time getting in tune with them to the detriment of the work you're supposed to do, but I can live with it. The killer was the project manager. She was, to put it politely, a pompous idiot. There were 3 of us from the agency involved in a 6-week project, and we spent most of the first morning in her office while she told us, essentially, that we were the lowest of the low and good-for-nothing time wasters, and she would be keeping a close eye on everything we did. I glanced at my fellow inmates. They'd been here before, so knew the score. Their faces were carefully neutral. We started work, and, sure enough, I wasted time trying to understand why I had to complete Form AB 123 when I wanted X and Form UV 789 when I wanted Y, when X and Y were 2 parts of the same thing. Mrs. Buffoon, as I christened her, was not happy and made certain I knew about it. She had her deadlines and her expectations, and I was damned well going to make them. I did, through the simple expedient of working late more days than not. It was clear she was trying to rattle me to prove her theory that all contractors were useless scumsucker, and I was damned if I'd give her the satisfaction. My teammates were no help either. They took this job because of the pay and were only grateful that, because I was in the spotlight, they were allowed to get on with their work in relative peace. I say relative, for Mrs. Buffoon was a great believer in teams, despite the fact that she didn't have a clue about how to run one. We had to complete weekly forecasts, daily diaries, and weekly progress reports, all of which were examined in great detail and publicly criticized at the weekly team meeting. After ripping our current progress to shreds, she would then tell us, in great detail, what we should accomplish next week. That this bore no relationship to the work that actually needed to be done never seemed to impinge on her consciousness. I quickly discovered that the other 2 had developed the technique of slanting their reports to make it appear that what they actually did was what she thought they ought to be doing. The 6 weeks passed, eventually. As we left the building for the last time, my teammates invited me for a drink. I didn't quite tell them where to shove it, though I was tempted. Why should I want to socialize with them when they'd let me be their fall guy for a month and a half? I phoned the agency the next day to tell them I wouldn't be available for several days. I was taking some time off. Take a week. You deserve it. I'll pay you half fee as a thank you. That wasn't unusual. It was unheard of. You don't need to do that. You helped me out of a really sticky situation. I appreciate it. Well, there's an old adage about gift horses. Then you'd better avert your eyes quickly. Take it. I insist. Thanks. That's very generous. Thank you. I've got something lined up for you a week Monday. Call me later in the week. Will do. Well, that was an interesting conversation. I'd always talked to the same woman on the phone, and I'd assumed she was just someone who liaised with the contractors. However, she had said that she would pay the bonus, and she insisted I take it. Employees, unless they're very senior, don't make that sort of offer, so who was I dealing with? An intriguing little mystery. I spent the week looking for better accommodation. Maybe it was my lucky week, for I found the ideal place. A 4-roomed flat in an old Victorian tenement. I didn't quite follow the story about how it came to be vacant, but I wasn't really bothered. Even better, in exchange for moving in at the end of the month and committing to a 12-month lease, I got a few pounds off the rent. As it was a bit more expensive than my current place, every little helped. I phoned the agency on Friday to tell them about my pending change of address and get details of the next assignment. My intriguing contact complimented me. Apparently, I'd struck it even luckier than I'd thought, for my new flat was in a reasonably desirable area. You're planning on sticking around then? So it would seem. Good. She didn't elaborate. She seemed in an unusually chatty mood, and I had no objections, for she had a very pleasant telephone manner and was easy to talk to. I hung up even more intrigued than before. Why was she pleased that I was going to be here for the foreseeable future? The new job was much more to my liking, as was the one after that and the one after that. By now, the summer was beginning to wane, and the hordes of tourists were thinking about packing their bags and returning to wherever they had come from. Then I got another call from my mystery lady. I'm going to impose on your good nature again, she said without preamble. Oh no, I groaned. Not Mrs. Buffoon again. Mrs. Buffoon? The project non-manager on the last crappy project you dropped me in. She laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh. It was a very pleasant sound. No, not Mrs. Buffoon. I need a team leader urgently. I know you've done that sort of thing before. Would you help me out again? What sort of team and what sort of company? I asked cautiously. In fact, I'd already made my mind up I'd take the job. The company was a large financial institution, and the assignment was to fill in for a permanent staff member who'd gone on long-term sick leave. This was not a good position to fill. First, you've got to get up to speed with ongoing projects in no time flat. Second, You've got to placate the ruffled feathers of all the existing team members who think they should have been given temporary promotion rather than bringing in an outsider. It never seems to occur to these people that, if they'd been able to do the job, they'd already be up for promotion. Third, well, let's just say I was going to have to employ all my people skills and then some. The contract was an open one, but guaranteed to be at least 2 months. It turned out to be not as bad as I'd feared. I had a good team, most of whom realized the necessity of my presence. There was the usual jockeying for position among my peers, and the usual attempts to dump the shit projects on the greenhorn. I'd been around enough to avoid most of the major pitfalls. I think my acceptance came when, about 3 weeks after I'd started, I came back from a management meeting and called my team together. I told them we'd been asked to take on a new project and what it was. Around the table, faces blanched and the temperature dropped by several degrees. I told them to screw off. I announced casually. The expressions changed to ones of incredulity. You didn't, did you? I didn't actually use those exact words, but pretty close. Listen, guys, I may be new here, but I'm not exactly inexperienced. I can spot a can of worms at 100 paces, and that project has the words on the tin in big bold letters. I was invited for a drink that Friday, and I knew I was one of them for the duration. The other thing that happened was that I rediscovered my appetite for women. The circumstances that had led to my flight north had rather soured me of the species, and then I'd been too busy finding my feet to be bothered. However, I bumped into an attractive blonde girl at the coffee machine one morning. It was being its usual temperamental self. Communing with the mothership was the expression used when it suddenly decided not to work then, just as suddenly decided to start again. We got chatting and I realized, with some surprise, that the old spark was there. It seemed to be mutual, for we kept bumping into each other, seemingly by accident. I asked her out. She accepted. We had a good time, which led to a second date and a third, and pretty soon it was accepted that Debbie and I were together. Neither of us expected much. She had been bruised as I had, though not quite as badly, and neither of us was looking for a long-term commitment. We dated for just over a month, then moved on by mutual consent. The relationship signaled, however, that I was available, and from then on I wasn't short of female companionship. Some of the would-be contenders fell by the wayside when I passed word through the grapevine, Maggie, the IT director's PA, that I wasn't looking to tie any knots, but there were enough to keep me amused. The third thing that happened had more far-reaching consequences. I was asked to come up to the operations director's office. Being invited to a director's office was generally regarded as a bad thing, except I didn't work for the operations director. I didn't even work for the company, so there was no obvious reason for the summons. He began with the usual softening up questions. How was I doing? Did I like working here? How was I finding the team? Was everything going okay? I gave him the usual non-committal answers. What did he expect? That I would say I hated the place and was about to jump off a tall building? Then he dropped his bombshell. Would I like to come and work for him as a special projects manager? For once I was completely lost for words. I spluttered about the agency and my commitment, and that I didn't know whether I'd want to permanently settle here. He waved it all aside and asked me to give it serious consideration. If I was interested in pursuing it, we'd talk about a precise job definition, pay, and all that stuff. His only commitment was that I would earn as much as I did as a contractor and have the pension scheme and perks to boot. I walked out of his office in a daze, and I don't think I heard a word anyone said to me for the rest of the day. I felt no better in the morning. The offer was tempting, of that there was no doubt, but the two biggest buts were, did I want to go back to full-time employment, and what exactly were special projects, which led to a third, but what would happen to me if there weren't any because, say, his budget had been cut? A fourth but was the question of what responsibilities I would have and how much authority I would be given to follow my ideas through. I needed to talk to a friendly voice at the agency, though I suspected it would become less friendly once I'd said my piece. Congratulations and shit, was the surprising response. Huh. Congratulations. You deserve it. I'm only surprised it's taken this long for someone to recognize your worth. Shit, because that's my instant reaction to losing you. Can you come and see me after work? I could. The address she gave me was down near the old docks. At one time a bustling port, the area had deteriorated with the decline in sea transport and acquired a most unsavory reputation for a while. Now urban regeneration was all the rage, and the old docks had been turned into upmarket housing. Trendy wine bars had replaced the spit and sawdust pubs, and Thai restaurants the fish and chip shops. I felt a bit sorry for the original inhabitants and wondered what became of them after the Okaya invasion started. I entered a nondescript door in the plain facade of a grimy Victorian building just off one of the main streets and climbed the stairs. The stairs were in good repair and the stairwell well lit. The first landing had two doors, an anonymous one and one with frosted glass and the name of the agency. I opened this one and stepped into Fantasyland. Instead of an office reception area, I had entered someone's living room. At least that was my first impression. The decor was green and gold and deep pink. There was a patterned carpet with an ice pile on the floor. There were curtains at the windows and decorative net curtains. There were several comfortable tan leather armchairs and two large pot plants and a coffee table. To prove it was an office, however, there was also a wooden desk and some filing cabinets. Behind the desk, which had no modesty panel, regarding me with an amused smile, was a refugee from the Playboy Mansion. No, that isn't fair, for she was no brainless blonde bimbo. For a start, she was brunette, and there was more than a hint of intelligence behind her brown eyes. In short, the room looked like something out of House Beautiful, or Office Beautiful if there's such a publication. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked.
Yes.
I swept my gaze round the room. "For a start, you can pay me more money." The smile slipped. "I mean, if you can afford this on the back of my fees." I winked at her to show I was joking, and the smile returned. "That's why we don't normally let you in here. Mutiny in the ranks and all that?"
Exactly.
"Well, I'm actually here by invitation. I've an appointment with, you know, this is most embarrassing. I've been speaking to the lady on the phone for 6 months, and I don't know her name." The receptionist was openly grinning now. "I could wind you up and embarrass you further by insisting you prove that you really do have an appointment, but I won't, as I know who you are and Miss Boswell is expecting you." "Huh. And I could foil your dastardly plot by the simple expedient of making a single phone call," I retorted. "Will you tell Miss Boswell I'm here?" "Curses. Foiled again," she said with a laugh. "I already have. She shouldn't be long. Take a seat." I felt curiously lightheaded. This place seemed so unreal. I'd worked for agencies before, and they always seemed to be shoestring affairs, even the large ones. How could a small agency like this afford such luxury? And the receptionist, a model girl in a model office. Coming on top of the shock of yesterday's job offer, I felt I had stepped into a dream world. For a second, the room around me faded. "Are you all right?" The receptionist was looking at me with some concern. "Yes," I said, blinking a couple of times. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you. You'd better sit down. Can I get you anything? A glass of water?" "No, thanks. I'll be fine." I took a deep breath. I don't know what came over me. "You sure? You looked a bit overwhelmed." I managed to grin. "Well, you're a pretty overwhelming person. I assume that's a compliment." She was smiling. "Most definitely. In which case, thank you. It won't get you any more money, though. I suspect it won't even get me a date." She made a little moue. "Unfortunately, you're right." I gave an exaggerated world-weary sigh.
I thought as much.
She giggled. At that moment, a woman entered from behind the reception area and advanced with a smile and outstretched hand. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I'm Natasha Boswell." Despite having spoken to her on the phone fairly regularly, I hadn't formed a mental image of Miss Boswell. If I'd been pushed, I'd probably have said she would be 40-something and somewhat motherly. That's the impression her voice gave anyway. The vision before me couldn't have been more different. "I'm pleased to meet you at last," I said faintly as I shook the proffered hand and took in the well-filled, exquisitely tailored blouse and skirt, the perfectly made-up face, the expertly coiffed dark blonde hair, and the glamour model figure. But it wasn't just the looks. She had the air of a woman in her prime who had total confidence in herself and her abilities. I realized I'd subconsciously straightened my shoulders and sucked in my tummy. "Come through and we'll talk." She led the way down a short corridor, opened a door, and gestured me inside. She looked equally impressive from the back. Her high-heeled shoes emphasized the length of her shapely legs and added an attractive sway to her hips. "Take a seat. Can I get you anything? Tea? Coffee? Something stronger?" "I'm not sure alcohol would be a good idea right now," I said with a deprecating smile. "Coffee, perhaps." "You mean I might ply you with liquor and have my evil way with you?" Her smile was teasing. "Not at all," I said in the same spirit. "Liquor plying's my job." "Ah, but we live in an age of female equality." "So we do. In which case you can ply away to your heart's content, but later." She touched my arm. It was only a fleeting touch, but she made it seem distractingly intimate. "I'll be back in a minute." This room was, if anything, even more luxurious than reception. My feet sank into the cream and green carpet. The brocade chairs and settee certainly didn't come from IKEA. The widescreen TV looked top of the range. The bookcase and side tables were of real wood. On the walls were pictures of young women. I couldn't tell if they were photographs or paintings, but Although the poses were decorous enough, there was something oddly erotic about them. I sank into one of the armchairs and tried to gather my wits. I felt I was going to need them. Miss Boswell returned with a tray and proceeded to pour the coffee. She pulled a side table to my chair and set the coffee cup on it. It was a simple act, but she did it with infinite grace. She took the seat opposite, stretched her long legs out in front of her, and crossed her ankles. I did my best not to look, for I realized she was doing it to distract me. "Are you in a hurry?" she asked. "Not particularly." I was surprised at the question. "Good. I confess I've wanted to meet you for some time." "Oh?" She grinned. "I don't normally deal with my contractors face to face, but you are an exception. I can understand why. You don't want your contractors here, that is." The other I'll suspend judgment on. She raised an inquiring eyebrow. I suspect their reaction would be much like mine. I gestured at the luxurious room. "A bigger cut." "Exactly. I wasn't being entirely serious, you know?" "I know. But others would be." I nodded. I sipped my coffee and waited. We looked at each other over the rims of our cups, sizing each other up, each waiting for the other to speak. I was content to wait. She was making the provocative comments, not I. She put her cup down and smiled. "I expect you're wondering why I regard you as an exception." She recrossed her legs, revealing a bit of thigh. I glanced at her legs, then went back to her face. I wasn't going to let myself be distracted. I shrugged. "I'm curious, but I can contain my curiosity. That's why." "You've lost me, I'm afraid." "I hope not. Let's take it from the top. You came into the office. It wasn't what you expected, and you were a bit overwhelmed. Yet you managed to flirt politely with Rowena. I appear. I'm clearly not what you expect, yet you don't ogle." She held up a warning hand. "I'm under no illusions about the effect I have on men. I've given you every opportunity to stare at my legs. Nice, aren't they?" She crossed them again, slowly and deliberately. This time I looked. They were nice legs, the sort you like to imagine curled round your back or your head. I was feeling a trifle warm. After an appropriate time, I raised my eyes to her face. She was wearing an enigmatic smile. "Very nice," I agreed. "And your point is?" "My point is focus. You don't let yourself be distracted. I've had seriously good reports from every company you've worked for. Yes, even Mrs. Buffoon." That did surprise me. It must have shown on my face, for her smile broadened. "It's a bit warm in here, don't you think? Do you mind if I open the window?" "Go ahead. I'll take my jacket off, if that's okay." "Feel free. This isn't a formal interview or anything." She had to stretch to reach the window catch. The pose made her push against her blouse. I had no idea what age she was, probably mid-30s. Even still, she had a superb figure. "Would you like me to get that?" I volunteered. "No. It's just a bit stiff, that's all." "There. Got it." The catch wasn't the only thing a bit stiff. I made a quick adjustment before settling back into my seat. She turned and perched herself on the windowsill, the evening light transforming her hair into a dark blonde halo. I smiled to myself. She was subtly pressing all the right buttons, clearly intentional. Until I figured out why, I resolved to stay unruffled. "Not Mrs. Buffoon herself, of course," she resumed. "But others noticed." "That's nice. Why are you here?" "I'm sorry?" "Here. Working for me. You're capable of much more." "Personal reasons." She looked at me inquiringly. "Until I know you much better, and not as my employer, that's all you're getting." "What if I said I was taking you off my books?" I gave a feral smile. "I've already had another offer, remember?" She laughed. "Touché. Okay, I won't pry. I have a problem, though. You're overqualified for the work you do. You know as well as I that very little contracting work is at a senior level. The project leader job was an exception. If you want that sort of work, you have to go to Deloitte or one of the other big ones." She sat down again, this time on the edge of the seat with her elbows on her knees and her hands loosely clasped in front of her. "I'm going to be very honest with you in the hope you will reciprocate." Her voice was earnest. "You've been very good for me. Thanks to your efforts, my reputation has gone up. You've set a standard that my other contractors are now forced to live up to, and I've had several applications from well-qualified people. I want to keep you, but I don't know how. You could get up and walk out right now, and there isn't a damn thing I could do about it. I don't want that to happen. I need to know what I need to do to persuade you to stay. To do that, I need to know what makes you tick, what drives you. I'm proposing that, for a while, we forget about our relationship and work and just chat." She gave a little laugh. "You never know. You might even get dinner out of it." It was my turn to stand. This was a turn-up for the books. What'd make me tick? Up till now, nothing. I'd simply reacted to my previous situation and had been going on autopilot since. I walked to the window and stood looking down at the tail end of the rush hour traffic outside. Money was nice. Not as an end in itself, but for what you could do with it. The thing was that, once I'd covered my expenses, I didn't have much I wanted to do with it. Job satisfaction was important. I like to be challenged and I like doing a good job. That the client was satisfied was secondary to my own sense of achievement. I also liked variety, which is why I preferred contracting. I sighed. I was going to have to tell her. I turned to face her. Sorry. I needed to get my thoughts in order. You mentioned honesty. I really didn't quite expect you to be quite so forthright. Because you have, I'm going to have to say some things I didn't want to talk about. It's not easy, even now, so I ask your patience. She didn't respond, but I saw understanding in her face. I told her about catching Helen, my ex-wife, flagrante delicto. I told her how, stupidly, I'd walked out instead of throwing her out and how her shyster lawyer had taken me to the cleaners as mine had turned out to be a waste of space. I told her how I'd simply stuck a pin in the map and ended up here. So there you have it, I said with a shrug, crossing back to my seat. I've no idea what I want, where I'm going, or what the future holds. I grinned wryly. Any ideas? She reached out and touched my hand as I passed. Again, it was only a fleeting contact, but the feeling of intimacy was remarkable. In fact, she was a remarkable woman all round. On top of being sexy, successful, and confident, she engendered a feeling of intimacy as if she was your best friend and closest confidant. Thank you, she said simply. I appreciate your candor. I gave her a lopsided grin. You are a formidable woman, Miss Boswell. In an hour, you've managed to get me to talk about something I swore I'd never mention. You're pretty formidable yourself. And it's Natasha. You would be entitled to feel very bitter about your experiences and perhaps indulge in self-pity. I detected neither. I shrugged. There didn't seem a need to say anything. She leant back in her chair again, giving me another opportunity to admire her legs. I took it. Now I'm going to change the topic completely. You asked if I had any ideas. Irony aside, some may come to us as we talk. I don't know about you, but I fancy a drink. Since I'd moved here, I'd been persuaded as to the merits of whiskey, which I drank with water. A panel on the wall turned out to be a drinks cabinet. I watched her openly as she gracefully and expertly fixed the drinks. I had to be careful. She was a bewitching woman. One I could become enamored with very easily, although I instinctively knew that, just like the receptionist, she was beyond my reach. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't get a chance to look away before she turned. She smiled and I blushed. You can look if you want. Unlike many these days, I don't feel insulted when a man admires me. I don't dress like this for no reason. That gave us our first topic of conversation. She regarded women who were insulted when their looks were admired as stupid and probably repressed. It was a big, hard world, and everybody had to use whatever tools they were given to get what they wanted. Looks were a tool as much as muscles or brains. If you weren't prepared to use them, and to stand up for yourself, you'd be trampled underfoot. We agreed that you didn't need to be unpleasant to be successful. Often you got what you wanted more easily by being pleasant and polite, rather than being rude and overbearing. We also agreed that this could be misconstrued as weakness, and you needed to be prepared to take a stand at times. From there we wandered far and wide for over an hour, and I felt as if I'd known her all my life. I enjoy talking to women. I like hearing their different slant on life, but never have I had a conversation such as Natasha and I enjoyed that evening. Eventually we started to wind down. I can't remember when I enjoyed a conversation more, she said. I agree. You're a fascinating woman, Natasha. Thank you. I try. However, I suppose we need to talk about the reason you're here. Tell me about this job offer. There's not much to tell. I'd be working to the operations director as a special projects manager. I'll get more details if I say I'm interested. Okay, tell me the pros and cons. I rehearsed the thoughts that had been going through my head. You've thought it through. I can't say I'm surprised. I'd even been more surprised if you hadn't. Let's try a suppose now. Suppose you get what you want in terms of assurances. Would you take it? I honestly don't know. I'd be very tempted. So would I in your shoes. Let's continue our suppose. Suppose you were so tempted as to say yes. What would I have to do to persuade you to say no? I looked at her in astonishment. There's a cricketing adage that you take the bad light if it's offered, particularly if you're losing. You've lost me. If you're in a tricky situation, look for a way to postpone defeat. You never know. Tomorrow it might rain, or their star bowler will fall downstairs and break his arm, or your side might bat like demons. What I mean is that, if you tell me nothing, then I'll accept the light. You haven't actually committed to anything yet, and tomorrow is another day. I might still win. It had been getting dark as we conversed. In this part of the country, and at this time of year the evenings are long, drawn to out affairs with the light fading only slowly from the sky. We hadn't turned on the lights. In the last glimmers of daylight, Natasha seemed to glow. I couldn't tear my glance away. I knew, then, what would guarantee my loyalty from now until the end of eternity, but knew, equally well, that such a prize was beyond my grasp. I barked a short laugh. Well, the answer's not nothing. The answer is I don't know. Don't you? I think you do. Her voice was low and intense. I'm going to tell you a story. I should say that I must ask you not to repeat anything I say to anyone, but I know that's unnecessary. You are a man of honor. She paused for a long moment. You wondered, quite naturally, how, as the owner of a small employment agency, I could afford to decorate this office the way it is. The short answer is that the employment agency is only part of the story. The agency makes a good profit, it's true, but nothing like enough to pay for this place. The real money comes from prostitution. What? Patience. Please hear me out. I'm a prostitute, call girl, hooker, call it what you will. The door's over there. I sat rooted to my chair. The words she used were all pejorative and, somehow, I couldn't associate any of them with her. It wasn't that I didn't believe her, it was more that I felt there was more to it than the bald statement of fact. No reaction? No bout of moral indignation? No condemnation? No sense of disgust? There was a hint of cynicism in her voice. No, none of these, I said slowly. I've dealt with you professionally for 6 months and got to know you a great deal better this evening. I like you and I respect you. I'm shocked, but that's what you intended. Shock tactics aren't going to work. In the silence, I could hear her release the pent-up breath. I knew they wouldn't, but you were worried anyway. I said with a small chuckle. Yes, my name's not really Boswell. I changed it. As a girl of 17, I was lured from my home in the Ukraine by the promise of a good job in Britain. The good job turned out to be prostitution. I was lucky. I'd only been here a few weeks when the gang who smuggled me into the country were busted and the house I was being kept in was raided. They didn't find me. I wasn't being cooperative, so I'd been tied up and locked in a small shed in a nearby allotment. When no one came, I managed to get free but couldn't get out of the shed. A man walking his dog found me. Fortunately, he didn't call the police and, even more fortunately, he liked young girls. I stayed with him for 3 years. He taught me everything, got me a passport, taught me English, gave me an education. I owe him everything. He was quite elderly and had heart problems. He had a heart attack. It wasn't fatal, but he knew his end was in sight. He made arrangements, put money into bank accounts for me, gave me valuable items that I could sell. We devised an escape plan. He had another heart attack, fatal this time. In the furor, I slipped away as we'd agreed. I moved to another city. I knew I was going to be a prostitute, but I equally knew it was going to be on my terms. I joined an escort agency. I wasn't much good, but I found out what it was I needed to know to be good. I moved again. This time I used the money my benefactor had given me to learn what I needed. Grooming, deportment, dress sense, makeup. I devoured the arts magazines. I haunted the public library. I went to the theater, the cinema, concerts. It's amazing how cheaply you can do these things if you try. When I thought I was ready, I joined another escort agency. A better one this time. I was ready and I was successful. It wasn't enough. I was still dependent on the agency and I wanted my independence. However, I used my dates to learn more about what makes men and women tick. As I learned, I made my plans. I moved here. I moved here because I had a client, a nice gentleman, who lived here. I contacted him discreetly and made it known I was in town and open for business. He was a nice man. He put business my way and I got established. I had a problem, however. Everything I earned was under the counter. I didn't pay taxes or national insurance. I had money but no formal job, and it would be only a matter of time before the authorities noticed. I needed a legitimate front. Then I had my brainwave. By definition, call girls only work irregularly. At least they do if they're fussy. I knew a few, so I sounded them out. They agreed, so this agency was born. Initially, I just used prostitutes. They would go temping for a few days or a week, enough to give them a legitimate job. I registered them with the tax people and the rest, and, suddenly, we could breathe more easily. If we were careful, we could live reasonably open lives and nobody would ask questions. She paused to sip her drink, then gave a short laugh. What I hadn't counted on was that legitimate people would hear of me and want to sign up. I also hadn't considered the effect of sending a high-class hooker to be a receptionist or something. Bosses were soon on the phone asking for more. Suddenly I found I had a genuine, bona fide business on my hands, something for which I was ill-prepared. It was a struggle, and it nearly all unraveled a couple of times. On one side, I had a set of clients and a group of genuine temps, while, on the other, a different set of clients wanting special services. Keeping them separate was difficult, but I managed. Bit by bit, the business grew until, well, here we are. I didn't know what to say. I was stunned, shocked, amazed, and moved by her story. She had shown remarkable fortitude and determination. I was sure the reality of her life was a great deal more harrowing than she was making out, yet she had come out of each adverse situation stronger and better than before. Grubble, I said. I cleared my throat, which had become very dry. Thank you. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your candor. The best word I can find to describe my feelings right now is admiration. Admiration for someone who, despite having gone through what you have, has turned out like you have. How do you know what I'm like? I'm a professional hooker. I've been one for 18 years. To be good, you have to be able to read your clients and give them exactly what they want. And I'm very good. The implication was clear. I shook my head, then realized she couldn't see it in the gloom. No. My voice was harsh. I've been a contractor for over a decade. To be a good contractor, you have to give the client what he needs while persuading him he's getting what he thinks he wants. I'm a very good contractor. I'm 100% bullshit proof. She gave a shaky laugh. Well, so long as you don't let on that there's a real Natasha Boswell under the facade. I've a reputation to maintain. It wasn't much, but it served to reduce the tension. Hooker or not, I wanted her more than I'd wanted anyone before. Equally, I knew that my chances of that were receding at light speed. Suddenly, I didn't care. The room was dark. I could barely make out her shape in the chair. I could accept the job offer or find another agency. Whatever the outcome, I just had to tell her. You asked what would make me stay. I have an answer, a very simple answer. Just one word, you. Not Natasha Boswell, the call girl, but the Natasha Boswell that's sitting here just now. I'm sorry. I'll try and find my jacket and go. I'll find another agency. Sit right where you are. Don't you want to hear my response? I barked a short laugh. Not really. Then you don't want to know the answer is yes? The empty whiskey glass slipped from my nerveless fingers and thumped gently on the carpet. My ears were filled with a roaring noise. Sweat broke out all over my body. I felt as if the chair and I had become one. I wouldn't be able to rise if there was a bomb under it. Yes? I managed. Yes, she said firmly. But there's a condition. You have to come and work for me. No, you have to come and work with me. The business is expanding. I'm coping, but only just. In all honesty, I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth. I can't cope for much longer. I've been looking for someone for a long time. I've been watching you. When you coped with Mrs. Buffoon, I hoped. When you sailed through the project leader's job, I knew. I knew you were the right person. The problem was how to persuade you. Then, tonight, I knew I had the answer. Oh, that sounds cold and calculating. It isn't like that at all. I mean, if you had been someone else, I'd have tried other means to persuade you. Money, perks, shares, whatever. But after we started talking, I knew you wanted me, and I equally knew I wanted you. My God. I don't know what to say. I mean, Jesus. You've just turned my world upside down. Say yes. If I hadn't been me, as you put it, would you have offered yourself anyway? You scumsucker, she said, but without heat, then barked a short laugh. It serves me right, I suppose. If I go after someone with your abilities, I have to assume you're going to use them. Yes, but it would have been a strictly business arrangement. You get what you wanted, this Natasha Boswell? Yes. Huh. You told me to say yes. I'm saying it. Yes, I'll work with you. Yes, I'll take the real Natasha Boswell. In fact, I'll take Natasha Boswell on any terms at all. Yes. Oh, she said in a very small voice. I'm overwhelmed. Why? It was the way you said it. So intense. Thank you. I heard her draw a breath. I heard rather than saw her smile. Of course, if you do well, there'll be a bonus. Oh? I mean, I can't sustain the agency as it is. If I fail, a whole can of worms will be opened and many people will get hurt. If you know when you succeed in stabilizing it, a lot of people will be very grateful and are likely to want to show their appreciation. I'm thinking of Rowena and Louise and Debbie and Tia and Shauna, and I laughed and the tension drained from me. Whoa, hold on a moment. So far I've only agreed to you, and I have a feeling I'm going to have a hard enough time coping with you, never mind a whole harem full. Let's leave talk of bonuses and extras until we know where we stand. She laughed, a genuine, relaxed, from-the-heart laugh. Fair enough. In that case, would you like to kiss the senior partner? To seal the contract? Certainly. I groped for her hand in the dark and pulled her to her feet. And then the senior partner can take the junior partner to dinner. She did, eventually. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Yes, my wife cheated on me, and indeed, she left me for another man. Initially, I was consumed by rage and wished to damage both of them. However, that never materialized. Nevertheless, I acknowledge this might appear as a revenge story, though that was never my intention. I'm Randy Clipson, just an ordinary guy. I'm not a handsome figure, and a significant portion of my life was marked by excess weight. A shift occurred in high school due to my involvement in football, earning me the nickname Chipper. They used to say that if I chipped someone, they were going down. At 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing 260 pounds, playing football was somewhat expected. While not excelling as an athlete, I possessed substantial upper body strength even in high school, enabling me to push defensive linemen backward. Football proved instrumental throughout my 4 school years, aiding in shedding the excess fat I had carried for most of my life. Despite retaining a bit of a belly, the accumulated muscle more than compensated. Nonetheless, having been overweight for most of my life, the self-perception as a fatty lingered. Coupled with this mindset, I was painfully shy due to constant weight-related teasing during grade and middle school. In high school, being a football player shielded me from such mockery, and it came with certain privileges, no longer making me an outcast among the girls. Despite not attracting cheerleaders, some girls were willing to go out with me. Nonetheless, I didn't engage in much dating until my senior year, when I crossed paths with Cindy. Cindy Crawley transferred to our school in the latter part of my junior year, but she caught my attention only in senior year. Despite possessing the most beautiful face I had ever seen, Cindy carried at least 30 to 40 pounds of extra weight. This deterred most boys in my class, and I regret to admit that I initially shared that lack of interest. Our connection deepened when we became chemistry partners. While the subject was complicated for me, Cindy excelled and provided significant assistance. I owe her for my success in chemistry, which likely paved the way for my college journey. During our partnership, I discovered Cindy's friendly and humorous nature, along with a shared background of starting school late. Cindy had overcome a congenital heart defect, and I was held back a year by my parents, making both of us 19. Summoning all my courage, I decided to ask her out, understanding her initial suspicion given her challenging past. Despite her reluctance, she agreed to go out with me. Our first date, a simple outing to the movies followed by an ice cream soda, was enjoyable. However, my shyness prevented me from attempting to kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her, and her thrilled reaction led to several subsequent dates over the next few weeks. By the third date, I summoned the courage to give Cindy a kiss on the cheek, progressing to necking and reaching first base. The more I encountered Cindy, the more my affection for her deepened. While my developing romance was progressing, the football season took an unexpected turn. Cavern High, my high school, wasn't renowned for football prowess, but this season brought a surprising alignment of stars. Kirk Simmons, our standout quarterback, led the team with the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, serving as our running backs. Now positioned as the left tackle, I successfully shielded Kirk's blindside, ensuring he remained unsacked. Despite losing our initial game to Mohawk High with a score of 21-17, a perennial football powerhouse, we rebounded with 7 consecutive wins, progressing to the regionals. Although we reached the state finals and suffered a 28-14 defeat from Towson High, there was a positive note, triumphing over Mohawk High in the semifinals with a satisfying 38-7 victory. My apologies for the occasional indulgence in reminiscing about the glory days of high school football. Meanwhile, my relationship with Cindy continued, evolving to the next level. As prom season approached, I promptly invited Cindy to be my date. Her joyful acceptance was sealed with a big, affectionate kiss. Over the 4 weeks leading up to the prom, Cindy underwent a crash diet, shedding about 20 pounds to fit into the prom dress she had acquired. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Despite being what most guys might consider on the heavier side, I found her stunning. Cindy always had a generous bust, but it became more pronounced in that light blue prom dress. The dress struggled to contain her chest, which threatened to spill over. The entire evening was a dream as we danced together. As the night concluded, I suggested going parking, but Cindy had different plans, directing me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town. Cindy explained that her uncle had a small cabin he used for hunting. The cabin was indeed small, featuring only a tiny kitchen, a couch in front of a television, a bed, and a bathroom. We started on the sofa with our usual playfulness, concluding the night on a high note, despite our extracurricular activities. I got Cindy back home 15 minutes before her 2 a.m. curfew. Cindy and I remained close throughout the rest of high school, engaging in a physical relationship while being cautious with protection. Following graduation, I received a partial football scholarship at a Division II school 2 states away, while Cindy opted for a local community college. My major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Since I was heading off to school, we discussed what to do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up, feeling it wouldn't be fair to hold each other back. It was the toughest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how awful I felt going off to school and leaving Cindy behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, it would happen. I was terrified of losing her and hurting so badly. Upon my arrival at Mountain Ridge University, the thought of heading straight home crossed my mind, but I couldn't go back on my commitment. I had pledged to honor my commitment to the university, and my strong desire for a college education fueled my determination. The only solution I could think of was immersing myself in football practices and schoolwork. From morning till night, I dedicated myself to keeping my mind occupied. Despite the coach's advice against it, my coaches and teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Taking a full load of classes, being a college football player meant shedding fat and building muscle through intensive weight training, resulting in both upper and lower body strength. With only a partial scholarship, my parents covered the remaining balance, even though I knew they struggled with the cost. Playing football left me with no means to contribute financially. While I lacked funds to come home, I made a weekly call to Cindy, who appeared as devastated by our split as I was. My first college year concluded successfully, excelling in both football and academics. By the third game of the season, I earned a spot in the starting lineup, shifting to play left guard due to my slower speed. My increased strength proved beneficial, contributing to our 8-2 season record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list, much to my parents' delight. During the summer, Cindy and I resumed our relationship. I found myself deeply in love with her, or so I believed at the time. Reflecting on it, I've questioned whether it was love or just lust. After careful consideration, I lean towards love, as a small part of me still holds affection for her. I worked and took 3 online courses during the summer, determined to finish college as soon as possible. Cindy and I also resumed our bed activities, exploring each other's bodies whenever possible. I completed college in 3 years and married Cindy right after graduation. Both employed by the multinational software and electronics company Triorbit Electronics in Virginia, we worked in software development and human resources, respectively. After saving enough money, we purchased a small house and began discussing starting a family. The first 3.5 years of our marriage were wonderful, except for one aspect. We both gained a significant amount of weight. Cindy reached 230 pounds, and I weighed in at 310 pounds. I carried the extra weight better due to my height, but neither of us was content with the excess pounds. Despite unsuccessful attempts at dieting, my love for Cindy remained unwavering, regardless of her size. After 3 years of marriage with no kids, we consulted our family doctor. Following a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us, but suggested weight loss might aid Cindy's conception. So for the first time in our lives, we embarked on a strict diet. 6 months later, Cindy was down 50 pounds. I was only down about 25, but I must admit that I cheated more than I should have. Cindy's weight loss was noticeable, attracting attention from men. Alongside the diet, Cindy began going to the gym 5 days a week. Observing her transformation, I realized I had to step up my efforts. I strictly adhered to our diet and started hitting the gym with her. At the end of 1 year of dieting, Cindy had shed 80 pounds, and I had lost 90. While we both felt really good about ourselves, sadly, our weight loss was going to bring me a broken heart. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she started dressing in more revealing clothing. Initially enjoyable, I became displeased when I overheard some comments at work. However, I couldn't say anything because, for her whole life, Cindy had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me arose when Kirk Simmons was appointed head of human resources. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior programmer, and he was now 2 levels above me, becoming Cindy's boss. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. Hardly noticing her, I ended up dancing with her at my wife's request, as she danced with her boss. During a Christmas party, I danced a few times with Susie, while Kirk partnered with Cindy. Dancing just beside her, I found myself becoming noticeably excited. It wasn't a big deal, though, as still being in my 20s, any pretty girl could elicit the same response. One surprising aspect was that she wasn't a stuck-up snob, which pleased me. Upon Kirk and I arriving, I didn't recognize you or Cindy. Susie complimented us, expressing that we looked fabulous. My perception of Cindy's beauty had always been high, but now she was truly stunning. I mentioned, somewhat embarrassed, that someone should keep an eye on her. The response was a simple thank you. I expressed gratitude for Susie's kindness, and she blushed in response. The music concluded, and around 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy revealed a significant decision. She informed me of her choice to resume taking birth control pills. I raised objections, inquiring about our plans for having children. She straightforwardly mentioned that she had decided not to have any at the moment. My anger surfaced as I probed into her abrupt decision. She reassured me, stroking my arm, stating, "Look, we'll have kids. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." In hindsight, I should have recognized the problem at that moment, but I was clueless, having complete trust in Cindy. Unfortunately, my trust in Kirk was misplaced, as I could trust him as far as I could throw a bus. Unbeknownst to me, Kirk had put on a full-court press to get Cindy. She, of course, was flattered beyond belief that the former football captain of our high school team was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late and then going supposedly out with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a PI company, and within a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk engaging in a lovemaking act in the office. How they obtained that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them being affectionate at dinner. Videos showed Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. Lastly, there were pictures of them engaging in a lovemaking act on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having closeness with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner, I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. I spoke coldly, asking what the other person had to say. She mentioned that she didn't intend for it to happen, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. Cindy reacted, expressing disapproval and stating that there was no need for crudeness. She implied that if I had paid more attention to her, the situation might have been avoided. Initially taken aback, I briefly considered whether I had neglected her. However, my anger resurfaced, and I asserted that she shouldn't try to shift blame. I maintained my innocence and confronted her about the affair, asking for her explanation. She looked nervously at me but remained silent. I pressed further, inquiring about our next steps. Struggling to control my anger, I questioned whether she wanted to be with Kirk or with me. Despite expressing love for me, she tearfully admitted to also loving Kirk. I conveyed that a decision needed to be made, almost biting my tongue. I set a deadline, insisting on knowing her choice by the next day. If she chose to stay with me, she would have to sever ties with Kirk, resign from her job, and commit to attending counseling. Cindy acknowledged this. Later, I retrieved all her belongings, placing them in the hall, and informed her that she could sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The next day, I returned home early from work. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table as I had the previous night. She took a seat across from me, and I demanded to know if she had made up her mind. Tears started to flow down her cheek as she expressed her love for me, but admitted an inability to give up Kirk, stating that she loved him too. I sighed deeply, attempting to conceal the fact that my heart was breaking. Acknowledging her choice, she simply nodded, causing a pain deeper than if someone had stabbed me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between eliminating them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. I sarcastically remarked that she had chosen quite the winner. Bringing up Kirk and Susie's new baby boy, I questioned whether it bothered her to leave the child without a father. A hint of anger and shame crossed Cindy's face as she mentioned that Kirk had planned to divorce Susie before their involvement. Continuing, I asked if she was willing to discard almost 4 years of marriage just like that. Struggling to contain both my temper and tears, I sought an understanding of her decision. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering smacking Cindy to a pulp and then go look for Kirk to break his neck. She softly expressed regret for any hurt caused, her voice tender. She clarified that she hadn't intended for it to happen, but had fallen deeply in love with Kirk, and he felt the same way. She asserted the need to be with him. Despite feeling an intense urge to damage her at that moment, I recognized the importance of maintaining control. It required all my self-control, but I eventually succeeded. Deep within the logical part of my brain, I recognized that resorting to physical violence would yield nothing. I refrained from revealing the depth of her hurt and refused to beg her to stay, considering it the worst thing a cheated-on husband can do, a sign of total weakness. I plainly stated that if the other person desired a divorce, they would have it. Confusion filled her eyes, and perhaps I imagined it, a hint of hurt. She might have expected me to fight to keep her, but I knew that if she had decided to leave, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was taken aback by my behavior, but rose and started packing her belongings. The following day, I visited the bank and our financial advisor, explaining the situation and withdrawing half the funds from each account. I then established separate accounts in my name only, canceled all our credit cards, and applied for new ones solely in my name. I listed our house for sale through a realtor friend and finally consulted a divorce lawyer. With a heart full of hatred, I ensured Cindy was served at work, citing infidelity as the cause. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward. With only about 4 years of marriage and no children, there was nothing to dispute. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was messier, dealing with a child under a year old, and Susie having never worked. He faced child support and alimony. One aspect of Kirk's divorce that admittedly brought me some satisfaction was his decision to cut costs on his lawyer. Instead of limiting spousal maintenance to a year or two, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't pleased, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were finalized, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The initial week post-breakup left me utterly lost. Not being much of a drinker, that held no appeal. For weeks, revenge consumed my thoughts. I'm sure every guy who's been cheated on can relate. I even began searching the internet for information on how ex-husbands sought revenge on their former wives and lovers. I found myself in a dark place, even purchasing a weapon. Then, as I read story after story about guys getting revenge, a shift occurred in my perspective. Initially, my thoughts of revenge were centered on violence. Subsequently, I considered damaging their property, contemplating ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and various other impractical schemes. As I read more revenge stories, I recognized the absurdity in most of them, realizing no feasible way to achieve the revenge I desired. Eventually, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor spent almost 2 hours explaining that seeking revenge wouldn't alleviate the hurt from my wife's betrayal. Regardless of how much pain I inflicted on my former wife or her new husband, the emotional anguish would persist. The pastor's advice, though seemingly simple for someone with my kind of pain, emphasized that only time and distance would heal my heart. Despite my initial skepticism, I acknowledged that being near Cindy without the possibility of being with her would continually reopen the emotional wound. I also accepted the pastor's truth about revenge. It wouldn't alleviate the hurt. Consequently, I followed his counsel, necessitating the establishment of distance between Cindy and me. An opportunity arose when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised significant profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's entirely classified, so I can't provide details. Suffice to say, it aimed to position the United States ahead of Russia and China, contingent on my company's successful delivery. The rumor circulating was that the project was significantly behind and over budget, making it different from typical government contracts. While substantial profits were at stake, the company faced great risk. Unlike other government projects, there would be no progress payments during the development of this software and its accompanying electronic components. Tremendous penalties loomed for late delivery, and the company could possibly go under if the project didn't meet the contract requirements. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to consult on the impending disaster. Most other designers were hesitant to get involved, updating their resumes, and considering leaving the company. Taking on the project meant risking termination and potential company collapse. The stigma of failure would linger for a long time. However, considering my modest needs post-divorce, the prospect of losing my job seemed manageable. Learning that Cindy was pregnant added emotional weight, as I had always envisioned starting a family with her. Evaluating the project data provided, it became clear that the chosen direction wouldn't work. Despite the risks, I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California, putting about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me, reminiscent of my first year in college. I delved into my work, enduring long days, sometimes spanning 20 hours, leaving little time to contemplate Cindy. I terminated 3/4 of the programmers and all engineers handling electronic components, bringing in fresh talent. Despite the looming 11-month deadline, I scrapped their progress, relying on the creativity of engineers I brought on board, including some poached from rival companies. Their skepticism turned to astonishment when I explained what I wanted them to build and why I envisioned the electronic components in that particular way. Yet, the challenge shifted to making the software functional. Gradually, we crafted a program that instilled confidence in me. It wasn't until 3 weeks before delivering our product to the military that I was certain of our success. The initial test, merging the software and electronic components, displayed a 96% success rate. Scanning the 4% that hadn't worked, I identified easy fixes. The revelation of our program's success triggered a surge in company stocks by over 300 points within a couple of months. Subsequently, the Defense Department announced the expansion of our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines, forecasting billions in profits. The success didn't halt there. I recognized the potential to tweak the program for various commercial applications. Essentially, we removed all classified information, creating an outstanding platform for practical uses. The array of things adaptable to this program seemed boundless. Following this triumph, I earned a promotion to Senior Vice President, tasked with developing these commercial applications. In the years that followed, frequent returns to the Virginia home office never led to encounters with Kirk or Cindy. Despite not anticipating any impact on me, I desired no contact, having nothing to convey to either of them. The pastor's counsel about putting time and distance between heartbreak had proven 100% accurate. I had moved on. During one visit, I unexpectedly met Kelly Bailey, a former cheerleader from Cavern High and Susie's best friend. Aware of her marriage to Jason Bailey and having a son before I met Cindy, I always harbored a crush on Kelly. The prettiest cheerleader, Kelly's warm demeanor in high school made her impossible not to like. Although she had aged somewhat, she remained physically attractive. In contrast to Cindy's short blonde hair and ample figure, Kelly, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, had long black hair and proportionally smaller chest. A shared warmth in their smiles was the commonality. Stunned that she recognized me in a grocery store preparing for a board presentation, we exchanged smiles. Despite a few gray hairs and small wrinkles, I still had a slight crush. Kelly called out to me as I pondered over frozen dinners. Upon recognizing her voice, I blushed slightly. She then stopped her basket next to mine, and I greeted her with a smile, expressing my flattery at her recognition. She confessed that she wouldn't have recognized me if Susie hadn't pointed me out during lunch at Tri-Orbit. I was genuinely surprised when she mentioned that. She then smiled and confirmed that she had been working at Tri-Orbit for about 6 years, specifically in the marketing department. It surprised me to learn that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a twinge of guilt for not knowing that. However, since I had little involvement with marketing, I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt like I should have been aware. "How are you doing?" I eventually asked to ease my discomfort. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real idiot. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also with half a dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty lightly considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't own a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hassle him for it every month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son Scott. I get furious when I think about it," she said. I apologized to Kelly, expressing regret over Jason's behavior. I admitted that although I was aware he had a wild side, I had hoped he would calm down after marriage. Pausing for a moment, I looked into Kelly's emerald green eyes, feeling unsure of what to say next. Eventually, I mentioned that my wife and I were divorced, with Cindy choosing to pursue Todd. "No, Randy," Kelly shook her head. "It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it." "I suppose I can't argue with that," I admitted, "but it takes two to tango." "You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?" she asked, eyeing my cart. "Yeah, I'm afraid so," I nodded. "I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle. Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good." Initially, I hesitated, but the idea of a home-cooked meal proved too tempting to resist. I mentioned that I wouldn't mind having a real meal if it wasn't too much trouble. I couldn't recall the last time I had one. The evening turned out to be delightful. Kelly made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was enjoyable having someone to converse with. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like me. We had a great time discussing the team and their prospects for the upcoming season. I was a die-hard fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company covered them because I would take potential clients to the games. When I didn't have any clients, I'd invite my buddies, and if I couldn't find anyone to go with me, I'd go alone. I'd give away the other 3 tickets, usually to people trying to buy from a scalper. Scotty expressed a wish to attend a game someday, sounding wistful. In response, I impulsively offered to make it happen. Once the words left my mouth, I realized I had overstepped and swiftly attempted to rectify it. "That is, of course, if your mother approves." Scotty turned to his mother with imploring eyes. "All she said is, 'We'll discuss it at the end of the evening,'" I apologized. "I'm sorry about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offer. It slipped out before I realized. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him attending a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him." She stood there with piercing eyes, and I realized that I had made another mistake. Quickly, I attempted to rectify it, but only ended up making another blunder. After a brief pause, I stuttered out that the invitation also extended to her. I suggested securing separate rooms, with one for Kelly and Scotty and another for myself. Despite feeling embarrassed, Kelly simply smiled and called me the sweetest man while chuckling. She remarked that my expression was priceless. Feeling relieved, I sighed, as I truly didn't want to offend her. I enjoyed her company and hoped we could meet up from time to time. Deciding to push ahead, I said, "Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to." Kelly studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me, and I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty." Over the following year, I'd call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we'd get together several times. I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win that night. After Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door unexpectedly, I was engrossed in watching a local sports station analyze the Bucs game. Concerned, I asked if everything was all right, particularly about Scotty's well-being. Kelly reassured me with a smile that nothing was wrong and that Scotty was sleeping peacefully, excited about the playoffs. She expressed a desire to have a drink and talk. Feeling a bit underdressed in my boxer shorts and t-shirt, I mentioned that I needed to put on some pants before inviting her in. However, upon searching for my trousers, I realized they weren't where I thought I had left them. Kelly said there was no need for pants as she pushed the door open and entered the room hurriedly. As I continued searching for my pants without success, Kelly giggled at the situation, causing my face to flush red with embarrassment. She then suggested putting us on an even playing field if I felt uncomfortable, and proceeded to remove her skirt, leaving us both in our underwear. With a smile, she asked me to mix her a drink and join her for a conversation. I went to the minibar, retrieving 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I mixed the drinks, Kelly climbed onto my bed and sat cross-legged, her white-laced underwear catching my attention. After handing Kelly her drink, I looked around the room for a place to sit. Sensing my hesitation, Kelly gestured towards the bed and invited me to sit beside her, reassuring me that she wouldn't bite. Despite still feeling embarrassed and red-faced, I nodded and took a seat next to her. A big swallow of my drink helped me relax as the rum coursed through my body. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Kelly kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled. "I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable. Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore." Kelly had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. We kissed a long time, with our tongues exploring every part of each other's mouths. She tasted so sweet. After we parted ways, I expressed admiration, mentioning that she was a beautiful and amazing woman. Kelly then laid her head on my chest. That night of passion surpassed my first time with Cindy. 6 months after that night, Kelly and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. Jason had been as big a turd as Kelly had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. Jason was still close friends with Kirk, and every time he came to Kelly's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great closeness Kirk and Cindy were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Kirk was still heading up the human resources department for the company, but Cindy had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Kirk and Cindy had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time, when I heard Kelly on the phone giving Jason help for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs, Kelly spoke sternly, insisting that I needed to stay out of the situation. She expressed determination not to let him off the hook for child support, despite his neglect of his son. I promptly withdrew my statement. acknowledging that the money in question belonged to Scotty. In December, I was set to be appointed executive vice president of the company. The announcement was scheduled for the Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, with around 400 to 500 attendees. I felt a bit self-conscious about the grand recognition at this event, but Kelly was overjoyed. She scolded me for complaining, insisting that I deserved the recognition. I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year. I responded, suggesting that it may not matter. However, she countered with a smile, mentioning that she was married to the most beautiful woman in the world and had a surprise for me. We recalled a past incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber. I acknowledged the memory with a nod, which was followed by a silly grin. She confirmed that she was pregnant now, expressing her determination to keep me close. Embracing me tightly, she expressed her desire for a bed night if we didn't have to attend the party. I confessed that I wasn't particularly fond of parties anymore, as I had to attend so many that they had lost their appeal. Kelly, however, still seemed to enjoy them, especially when I was with her. She had a certain aura that attracted people to her. We danced for a while before running into Kirk and Cindy, who were accompanied by Jason and his date Kathy. I was genuinely surprised to see Cindy's weight gain and Kirk's protruding belly, while Jason remained in good shape. I speculated that Jason might still be actively seeking romantic encounters. I was unsure what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. "Could I have your attention for just a moment?" I realized it was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Triorbit. "I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Randy Clipson." A spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Kelly pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. Jason seemed pissed, and jealousy filled Kirk's face. However, when I glanced at Cindy, there was a look of sadness and loss. Feeling uncertain about how to proceed, I watched as Kelly took charge. She greeted Kirk, Cindy, and Jason warmly, hugging each of them in turn. Then, she turned her attention to Kathy, extending a polite handshake and expressing pleasure in meeting her. I took my lead from my wife. I shook Kirk, Jason, and Kathy's hands, and gave Cindy a small hug. We chatted briefly, and the music began playing. In a surprising twist, Kelly suggested, "Randy, why don't you dance with Cindy, and I'll dance with my ex-husband? Kathy, why don't you and Kirk share a dance as well?" I looked at Kelly with a questioning expression, but she just smiled knowingly. So, I danced with Cindy. I asked about Kirk and Cindy's well-being, because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Cindy responded that things weren't going particularly well, and mentioned that she suspected they were headed for a divorce because she believed Kirk had been unfaithful. Expressing genuine sympathy, I told her I was sorry to hear about their situation. Cindy responded skeptically, questioning whether I truly meant my apology, as she expected me to say something along the lines of, "It serves you right." I initially expressed shock at the comment, stating that I would never say such a thing. Then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something similar. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. Shortly after that, the music stopped, and tears began to stream down Cindy's face. She expressed regret, admitting that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life, and lamenting that there was nothing she could do to rectify it. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel genuine sympathy for her. Kelly put her arm around me, prompting me to lean down and kiss her. I inquired about her dance with Jason, to which she responded with a smile, saying that he was still an idiot. He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him and told him why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world. I watched Cindy reach their table and sit down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Kirk and Jason appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I'd say that Kirk tried to put a move on Jason's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved, and totally happy.
I'm in my 50s and have never been married. In fact, I've never even been close to getting married. However, I do have two men in my life who are very dear to me. They are my nephews by marriage. It feels a bit embarrassing to share this, but here's my story. I've been running a daycare for quite some time, located in an apartment complex. Ever since I was young, I've had a special fondness for children. I grew up as the youngest of 3 sisters, with more than a decade separating me from my siblings. I vividly recall when my eldest sister brought her newborn to our home for postpartum care. Right after school, I'd rush home, excited to see my niece or nephew, learning how to change diapers and feed them formula from my sister. Interestingly, the baby would cry more when held by my brother-in-law, but would stop crying when I took over. This experience inspired me to pursue a degree in early childhood education. The courses were fascinating, and I thoroughly enjoyed my internship. During my senior year, I even worked part-time at a daycare during the holidays. After graduating, I earned my certification and started working in daycare. I found immense joy in caring for these adorable toddlers, who had just begun to speak, calling me teacher. My passion solidified my belief that I was meant to spend my life caring for children. My family, who always saw me as the carefree youngest child, was amazed that I had chosen to dedicate my life to teaching at a daycare. Approaching his 70s, my father offered to help me start my own daycare, and we found the perfect location. In the administrative office of the apartment complex they were moving to, given the complex housed over 1,000 units. Our daycare quickly became popular. Despite being relatively young, I had significant experience and a profound love for children, which drove me to pour my heart and soul into running the daycare. We managed to offer high-quality educational materials at a lower cost than other private daycares. Dealing with people wasn't always easy, but the joy of being around cheerful children every day made it all worthwhile. My sincerity seemed to resonate well as our daycare enjoyed great popularity, even receiving positive mentions on local online forums. In the midst of my busy life, I met a man. He was my first in many ways, my first boyfriend, my first trip away together, and the first to confess his love to me. Our time together built up a treasure trove of memories, and naturally, marriage came up in our conversations. We even started looking for a 3-bedroom apartment, as I had always dreamed of having my own room even after marriage. I was discussing redecorating our home office and walk-in closet with my partner when he looked at me incredulously. "Why would newlyweds need separate rooms?" he asked. I told him I wanted my own space. But then he brought up his mother. "What about my mom then?" Confused, I asked. "Your mother?" he explained. "Yeah, my mom said not to worry about household chores. She'll cook, clean, and do the laundry. She even offered to help us with some of the lease, suggesting we all live together. And since she has bad knees, it would be best if she took the master bedroom for easier access to the bathroom." You got that? It turned out my boyfriend and his mother had already planned everything without consulting me. His reasoning was that since I liked kids, he assumed I'd be great at taking care of adults too. I was speechless. How could I marry someone who informs rather than discusses? Right then and there, I broke up with him. My ex-boyfriend and his mother only approached me because I had a stable job as a kindergarten principal. It was my first relationship, and I was genuinely excited. But this experience made me lose trust in men and decide to remain single. Occasionally, I developed crushes on the fathers of my students during consultations, but I always held back my feelings, fearing it might disrupt my commitment to staying single. Eventually, I reached my 50s, realizing even if I wanted to, I couldn't have children anymore. My nieces, living in the same neighborhood, both had daughters, who ended up living in my apartment complex. They were exhausted from taking care of their children, but their husbands were easygoing and healthy. One weekend, when my niece left her child with me, she apologized for making me look after her baby too. Taking care of the child was no trouble at all for me, so I happily obliged. In the evening, a son-in-law, whom I'd occasionally greeted, came to pick up the child but ended up staying for beer and chicken while watching a variety show as the child had fallen asleep. It was a pleasant evening, and I got slightly drunk. When I woke up, I found the son-in-law lying next to me, and for a moment, he reminded me of a man I met in my 20s. Overwhelmed by his compliment on my looks and suggesting I could still find a partner, I suddenly felt emotional. I hinted to my nephew-in-law that it was okay for him to stay longer. Pulling out his phone, he said, "The baby fell asleep early. I'll hang out here watching tea with you and head back slowly. Let's have some more fun." We ended up spending the night together until dawn, thanks to my nephew-in-law making time. Thankfully, the little one slept through much of it. My niece was so grateful for the chance to hang out with her friends, without worry that she gifted me a box of fruit. After that day, my nephew-in-law started visiting me every weekend, and my niece began catching up with friends she hadn't seen in a while. My older sister's son-in-law and I got along incredibly well. He's tall and quite athletic, and he finds it amazing that I accept him as he is. My older niece and her husband went on a trip abroad for their wedding anniversary, and my younger niece wanted to leave her child with me because she felt more at ease. She had taken golf lessons and was going to play on the field for the first time. Naturally, I agreed to take care of the child, and my younger niece left for her early morning round. The grandchild was so gentle and beautiful. Even though I don't have children of my own, looking after these kids daily makes me feel young, and I've grown fond of this job. My niece called to say she would be a bit late, and the son-in-law came to pick up the child after his morning soccer game. He brought a pizza to share, feeling sorry, and we had a lovely chat. He had a different vibe from my older sister's son-in-law. perhaps more in tune with a woman's heart, with his quiet demeanor and gentle way of speaking. We discovered we shared a hobby. While he likes soccer, he also enjoys playing badminton. We agreed to play badminton in the apartment gym, and it became a regular weekend activity. Despite his slim appearance, he was quick and athletic. Our badminton games became a regular meetup. We even had group dinners with other club members and decided to go on a workshop with those we got. Along with about 6 of us, went to a nearby resort. I was the only woman in the group, the rest being older gentlemen. I booked a smaller place for myself. The members, having played badminton for a long time, were all fit and lean. We had dinner and then drinks with those we were close to, including my nephew-in-law and another gentleman. Having my nephew-in-law there was somewhat reassuring. The badminton members, all successful business owners, eventually went back to their rooms. Left alone with my nephew-in-law, we decided to have another drink in my room. My younger sister's son-in-law then hinted at a secret, revealing he felt incredibly lonely after having a child. Realizing the situation, I ended up spending the night in the same room with him. To have met not just one, but 2 young nephews-in-law feels like receiving blessings late in life. Teachers have started saying I look tired or younger, making me wonder if they've noticed anything, leaving me feeling a bit bashful.
Life doesn't always go the way we expect. I spent nearly 30 years climbing the corporate ladder in middle management, feeling secure in my career. But the economy proved far more unpredictable than I could have imagined. The downturn came quickly, and soon the company that seemed so stable was shrinking rapidly. I could see what was coming, but I felt powerless to stop it. As my career unraveled, I tried to keep things steady at home. I didn't want to burden my second wife, Kathy, with my troubles, especially since her real estate business was also suffering. She was barely scraping by, closing only a few sales here and there. Both of us were struggling in our separate worlds, not fully aware of the personal storms we were each dealing with. At 50, I found myself back in school, a path I never expected to take. After nearly 3 decades with the same company, I was blindsided by the sudden layoffs. The severance I received wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Our house and cars were paid off, so we weren't in terrible shape financially, but it still felt like a huge shift in my life. Kathy was also struggling, but she stayed hopeful. "Things are getting better," she'd say after finally landing a few showings. One day I decided to surprise her with lunch. I checked her first appointment, but didn't find her there. I eventually spotted her car at her most expensive listing, a huge estate that could have brought in a big commission. When I walked in quietly, I didn't want to disturb her with a client. But then I found her in the kitchen with a man. He had his pants down and she was on her knees. They were laughing and he was making crude comments while she smiled up at him. I stood frozen for a moment, then pulled out my phone and started recording. Once I had enough, I couldn't hold back my anger. I confronted the man, firmly grabbing his collar, but quickly realized that aggression was not the answer and chose to walk away. Kathy, shocked, ran out, leaving her blouse open behind her. The man was still moaning on the ground when I took his wallet, got his name, and told him I'd see him in court. He begged me not to ruin his family, admitting he wasn't the first man Kathy had done this with. He gave me a friend's name to back up his story. After that, I never spoke to Kathy again, except during the divorce. She sent me a long letter of apology, claiming she had done it to save her business. I didn't bother reading past the first page before throwing it away. I tried to keep things civil during the divorce until Kathy realized I wasn't coming back. Then she turned difficult. At our meeting with her lawyer, I handed over the photos and said, "If she fights me, these go public. I've found 2 more men she's used her sales techniques on. This is still an alienation of affection state, and the lawsuits from their wives could ruin her. She'll likely lose her real estate license, and even if she keeps it, no one around here will hire her." I gave them an ultimatum. This deal isn't bad, and it's her only shot. I want a decision by the end of the day. Her lawyer called just before the deadline. She had no choice but to agree. I wouldn't live in the house again, so she had to buy me out or sell it. She was furious when I told her she couldn't be the one to sell it. To raise the money, she had to sell her sailboat and Mustang. Rumors spread despite my efforts to keep things quiet, and she started having trouble getting listings. Once the divorce was final, I moved away. I found a great deal on a foreclosure, thanks to what I'd learned from Kathy. It was a 3-bedroom house on 9 acres with a barn and outbuildings. Way more than I needed, but I figured I could sell it for a profit later. When I met with an employment counselor, they laid out the harsh reality. The job market here is even tougher, and not having a degree is holding you back. You should consider going back to school. You only need about 1.5 years to finish your degree, and we'll cover tuition and books. With nothing to lose, I enrolled in a community college that had a partnership with a university, so I could eventually get a 4-year degree. Most of the students were older, like me, trying to improve their lives. I even made some friends and started dating, sometimes women younger than my 2 sons from my first marriage. My ex-wife had cheated too, but the boys were older by then, and we still had a good relationship. In my last semester, I took a workshop on starting small businesses. The final project was to create and market a fake business. Our instructor paired us in teams with people we had little in common with, thinking it would spark creativity. My partner, Gail, was a fashion major about 20 years younger than me. She was smart, but inexperienced. I invited Gail and a few other teams over to my place for a brainstorming session. After we hit a wall with ideas, we stopped trying and started drinking. I made sure everyone had a safe spot to sleep. Gail and I ended up talking about fashion and branding. She brought up how brands like Members Only and Izod made fortunes through smart marketing, even when the products weren't that great. We joked around, looking at our friends on the couch. "What about redneck chic?" I asked. Gail laughed. "We'd have to brand it." Looking at my friend's Aeropostale sweatshirt, I said, "How about Air Raccoon?" She burst out laughing. "And jeans, lardash." We joked back and forth until Gail headed to bed. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. That's when it hit me. We had our fake business idea. My administrative and marketing skills would pair perfectly with her fashion and production expertise. I made coffee, and Gail helped with breakfast. As everyone else slowly woke up, some ate while others just nursed their coffee and juice. I asked Gail to stay after everyone left, and I shared my idea. She grinned. I was thinking the same thing. She designed a logo of a raccoon, but something was missing. Then it came to me. Wings. It's Air Raccoon after all. She agreed and adjusted the design, and it looked much better. She also created the Lardash logo, a cheeky design shaped like 2 bum cheeks for the rear pocket. We now had a design, business plan, and marketing strategy. Time to move forward. Gail didn't have money but had the talent for production. I could handle the rest. Later, I asked her, "Wouldn't it be great to have real products, not just graphics? What do we need?" She explained we'd need a professional programmable monogram machine, costing anywhere from $7,000 to $15,000 new, or less if we found a used one. "That's more than I thought," I said, "but it's doable. Gail, how about this? I'll fund the startup, you handle design and production, and I'll take care of the rest." She thought about it for just a moment and agreed. I hired a lawyer to draw up a fair deal. The company would be called Redneck Chic Clothing Company, and I'd own the trademarks for Air Raccoon, while Gail would own the Lardash trademark. Since I was funding everything, I got 65%, and Gail got 35%. She wasn't thrilled with the split, but eventually agreed, knowing I could easily replace her. We found a $12,000 machine for $4,000 from a seller desperate to unload it, and had it delivered to my garage. After some training, Gail was thrilled and got to work. We bought 6 dozen assorted t-shirts, men's in black and dark red, women's in pink, yellow, and gray, plus black and white hats. Gail programmed the machine, and soon it was running, stitching our logos in a blend of silver, white, and black threads. The wings on the raccoon had a gossamer look exactly as we envisioned. We had Alice, Jamie, and some friends model the clothes. Gail insisted on getting an overlock machine to sew prototype jeans, which wasn't as pricey as the monogrammer. We even got help from some students in the TV and radio department to make a commercial. The ad featured Alice wearing our work jeans and Air Raccoon shirt, helping Jamie on the farm. Later, she wore the dressier version with a pink shirt, confidently looking into the camera. The tagline, "Lardash jeans, definitely not for little girls." The instructor was shocked by our success, and we aced the course. More importantly, we started getting real product requests and built a strong local following. Gail and I had different ideas about the business, but we agreed on many key points. I had a 48x36 metal building on my property, so we applied for a zoning waiver as a cottage industry, got approved, and remodeled it. We added insulation, a heat pump, a 2-stall bathroom, and a break room. We installed 12 new Melcro machines and advertised for employees. We were fortunate. The area had a history of textile work, so there were many skilled sewers. We received 900 applications for just 12 positions. We tested each candidate, ensuring they could handle the machines. By the end of the week, we had 11 hires. The last hire came unexpectedly, a woman in her 60s named Mavis. She didn't apply formally, but showed up asking for a chance. She had 50 years of experience sewing everything from shirts to sails and was in desperate need of work after her husband passed. Despite not knowing the machines, she was confident she could figure it out. I gave her a shot, and she teared up with gratitude. Gail wasn't thrilled at first, but was impressed by how quickly Mavis learned. She mastered the basics in 3 hours. We paid employees minimum wage plus a production bonus if they operated the machines at 80% efficiency, averaging $9 an hour. We couldn't offer full insurance, but arranged a deal for 4 doctor visits a year for $20 and up to 3 free generic prescriptions. It wasn't much, but the workers appreciated the effort. Most of them were middle-aged, with experience in the textile industry. Mavis naturally became the floor manager, acting like a grandmother and motivator to the team. We had each employee make a shirt in all 5 colors, with their names monogrammed, which became their uniforms. They voted to work 9-hour days Monday through Thursday and 4 hours on Friday, with overtime available if needed. Birthdays were celebrated with a party, paid day off, or extra pay, and we always gave a nice gift. Mavis got a 19-inch flat screen, a Blu-ray player, and a year of Netflix as a birthday gift. She cried for an hour before heading home. Gail grumbled about the cost, as money was starting to become her focus. For a year, we kept expanding, adding a mini shift of college kids working nights and Saturdays, but still couldn't keep up. Eventually, I told Gail we needed to find a bigger facility. "How big?" she asked, trying to hide her excitement. After reviewing projections for a month, I replied, "Big enough for at least 100 machines and space for your jeans line. We might need 2 buildings." Gail was thrilled. We found a large facility and a smaller one nearby. We planned to bring in 25 machines at a time with a full setup in a year. Gail began shopping for overlock sewing machines to start the jeans production. The business had grown too big for us to handle alone. We needed managers for the plant, production, office, HR, and accounting. Our original workers were nervous about the changes, fearing the loss of the informal environment they liked. I reassured them during a meeting. "We're not moving you. Your jobs are safe. I'll still be around, and Mavis Turner will manage day-to-day operations starting Monday." Everyone cheered. Mavis was a natural leader and had already been solving many floor problems. She was hesitant at first, but accepted the role when I doubled her pay. I also gave all the original workers a bonus of 2 weeks' pay as a thank you. Gail thought I was spoiling them, but I believed in investing in loyalty. The real branding breakthrough came from Mavis. Her great-nephew, a race car driver, had just moved up to the Busch Series, the equivalent of AAA in baseball. He was one of the few black racers on the circuit. Mavis asked for a day off to see him, and I had an idea. "I'll give you the day off with pay if you bring him by for lunch. I'll treat everyone if I can have a few minutes alone with him." She was thrilled, and I saw a golden opportunity for our brand. I did some research on Mavis's nephew. He had a solid racing record and was well-liked. He was married with 1 child, and his wife was on the plus side, which aligned well with our brand. When Mavis brought him in, he was friendly, posed for photos, and made everyone laugh, gaining some loyal fans that day. Later, I got him alone in my office. "How'd you get into racing?" I asked. He explained his dad had been a mechanic who dabbled in dirt track racing. He started with go-karts at age 10 and moved on to dirt track cars by 15. Now he was set to race in the Busch Series. I was impressed. "How do you think you'll do with the right sponsorship?" "We're running on a tight budget, but I should do all right." I cut to the chase. "Let's talk business. My company's growing, but we're not there yet. Send me some numbers to get a raccoon on your car. In the meantime, how about doing some ads for us, you and your wife? We'll pay you the going rate and work sponsorship into the deal later. Think about it." I knew I was in over my head. I went to see my old professor, the one who'd helped me start this journey. He was happy to see me, and even introduced me to his class as a success story. Afterward, over coffee, I asked if he was really retiring. "Yes, after the semester," he said. I smiled. "No, you're not. You're going to be Vice President of Development at Redneck Chic Clothing." He was stunned. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. I need your connections in the academic and business world. Start building a team. We'll discuss salary later." I had already talked to Gail, and she was so focused on setting up the jeans factory, she agreed without hesitation. We also got lucky with new hires. My oldest son had just been downsized, so I hired him as our controller. He and his pregnant wife moved into a house I leased as a signing bonus. She became my personal assistant. Gail then introduced me to her aunt Amaryllis, who preferred to be called Amy. At 46, she was fit, professional, and very attractive. Without realizing it, I had hired her as our office manager. I figured even if she wasn't the best at the job, it'd be nice to have her around. Sexist, I know. Finally, my youngest son joined us as our materials manager. We didn't need a warehouse yet, but with bigger plans on the horizon, it was only a matter of time. We held a meeting with the key team: Gail, Amy, Ralph, my old professor Barry, our lawyer Greg, my son Jerry, and me. We needed to establish a chain of command to expand the company nationally. I was named CEO. Gail became VP of the jeans division. Ralph would manage the t-shirt plant. Greg and Amy would oversee the office, and Jerry would focus on streamlining materials and potential warehouse issues. Debbie, Greg's wife, would help with expansion projects. We set salaries and agreed on profit sharing, though there were no ownership options yet. Our sales were booming, and we struggled to keep up. The first 25 machines were online, and for a brief time, we were ahead of schedule. Betty, one of the original workers, was promoted to manage the new section. Barry suggested we incorporate and consider going public, but I wasn't thrilled about it, especially since we didn't manufacture our own shirts, which were foreign-made. Jerry came to me with an idea. Why not make our own shirts in the U.S.? He explained there were plenty of empty factories and skilled workers, plus government incentives to hire older workers. After reviewing the costs, we found it would add about 75 cents per shirt. Gail and Barry weren't on board, but both sons, Amy and Ralph, thought it was worth exploring, especially with the Made in America appeal. Debbie had just given birth to our first granddaughter, so she couldn't travel. I went with Jerry and Amy to visit potential locations. We found a perfect mid-sized building in a rural area that used to be a shirt factory. The local governments offered grants and incentives, making it an attractive option. However, Gail strongly opposed it, pushing for outsourcing to China for higher profits. I refused, saying, "This company will never move out of the country. It's about pride, not just profit." Jerry later pointed out that even if we made shirts here, the fabric would still come from China. However, he had a solution. A nearby American fabric plant that could meet our needs, adding about 50 cents per shirt, but making the product 100% American-made. Together, these changes would increase costs by $1.25 per shirt. Ralph and Amy supported raising prices to match the higher quality. Gail continued to object as she sourced her denim cheaply from Malaysia, boosting her division's profits. We started to disagree more frequently. At 24, Gail had changed. She wore designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and drove a Lexus. Her focus had shifted, and it was clear that money was clouding her judgment. Since Debbie ran errands for me, I gave her my company SUV and drove my truck to work. Ralph got the same SUV model, thinking we'd get a better deal buying two. Amy called me for a meeting. She had taken over HR after our original hire got caught in a pill sting, which we didn't expect. At 53, Amy had the right qualifications and was now managing HR for 225 hourly workers and 40 salaried employees across our operations. It was time to implement a health plan. Amy invited me to the sewing plant, where she had been staffing the operation for 6 weeks. The plant was almost ready to produce its first shirts, though still not fully staffed. I flew in on Friday to check on the progress. Amy greeted me with a big hug at the airport, and I realized how long it had been since my last relationship. It had been 4 years since my split from Kathy, and 3 since we started the company. I hadn't dated in almost 2 years. Noticing me glance at her, Amy teased, "What are you doing?" I blushed. "Just enjoying the view." She laughed, joking that some people thought I might be gay. We arrived at the plant, where I noticed tents and a crowd gathered. It turned out to be our first annual company picnic. Amy introduced me to the employees as the founder and CEO, and I was touched by the applause. I made sure to talk to each employee and their families. The highlight was when the oldest employee, a 67-year-old grandmother, presented me with the first shirt made at the plant. I had it monogrammed by Mavis, framed and hung in my office. The company was thriving. Greg kept our finances stable, and Mavis and her team worked on new product designs, including a long tail line of collared shirts with a larger raccoon logo. We were also developing jackets with an even bigger logo. Mavis, now 65, even made a stuffed raccoon toy for her granddaughter, complete with wings. During a rare half-day off, I stopped by to see Mavis, who admitted she missed sewing but was proud of her work. When I asked about her retirement plans, she hugged me and said, "Not until you run me out. I've never been happier and am so grateful for this opportunity." I smiled and replied, "You'll probably outlast me." I was captivated by the stuffed raccoon Mavis made, so I had her make one for my granddaughter, which became her favorite toy. Mavis even made one for me that I kept on my desk. After a year of seeing it, I realized the potential. No stuffed animals were made in the US anymore. I put Jerry in charge, and a month later he had a plan. We set up a small factory with 14 employees using older machines, which produced high-quality toys. Gail opposed the idea, but I made the factory independent and owned solely by me under the Redneck Chic license, which appeased her. Since Mavis designed the raccoon, I gave her 25 cents per toy sold, and her quarterly checks rivaled her salary. Gail, now mostly at the jeans plant, had a new boyfriend, and Greg wasn't impressed with him. Meanwhile, we signed Will Turner, Mavis's nephew and a rising race car driver, and his wife Mary as endorsers. Initially hesitant, Mary eventually embraced our brand, modeling our jeans and shirts. Will promoted our products at the racetrack, handing out hats and shirts, and even launched our long-tail line. When we raised prices after going all-American, sales dipped briefly, so I posted a video explaining the price hike and used the phrase, "How much is your country worth to you?" Sales quickly rebounded. The stuffed raccoons became a hit, and we donated them to factory workers and local hospitals. ESPN featured Will handing out toys, nicknaming him the Raccoon Fairy, which caught on among his fans and fellow drivers. His car even featured the raccoon logo, boosting his popularity, especially with kids. As demand grew, we doubled the toy production. However, the stress of expanding the company and long work hours caught up to me, and I collapsed from exhaustion. My doctor warned me to start exercising and delegating more, or I'd face serious health issues. Surrounded by my family and team in the hospital, I realized it was time to make some changes. Debbie and Maria gave me a hard time, saying I needed to live long enough to meet my grandson due in 6 months. Maria also revealed she was pregnant, showing me her engagement ring and teasing, "You've got a lot to live for, old man." They joked that I needed a wife to keep me alive long enough to nag me to end of life. Amy and others stopped by, and Ralph and Barry teased me about taking it easy. What surprised me most was Amy, who was emotional and scolded me for not realizing how many people depended on me. Mavis, too, hugged me tightly, crying and making me promise to take care of myself. After 3 days in the hospital, I returned to the office where production stopped as everyone hugged me. Amy and Mavis then set up a schedule where I would work until lunchtime, then go home to rest. Amy often joined me for lunch to ensure I ate healthy, keeping me from indulging in fast food. I came to enjoy these lunches, especially since Amy and I hadn't spent much time together before. We talked about our lives, and I shared my experiences with failed marriages due to cheating. Amy opened up about her own divorce 6 years ago, sharing her hatred for cheaters and how she was glad to be rid of her ex-husband. I asked if she was seeing anyone, and she joked that her boss kept her too busy for a relationship. I laughed and admitted that while I had once sworn off marriage, I was rethinking it, believing that I could eventually find the right woman. The conversation shifted when Amy mentioned Gail's talk of moving the jeans operation to China. Gail had been spending more time at the main office and was engaged to someone Amy didn't like. Gail seemed frustrated with being a business owner instead of pursuing her original dream of being a fashion designer. And she still resented not getting a 50-50th split when we set up the business. I was surprised, as I had felt 35% was generous, considering I came up with the concept, name, and funding. It made me think that perhaps it was time for us to part ways. Amy seemed surprised, especially since Gail was her niece. "I don't think that's a good idea. Gail needs your guidance, and she wouldn't do nearly as well on her own," I grunted. "Just talking, but make sure she knows. No part of my company is going to China. We're making good money, and 300 Americans depend on us, not counting our suppliers." Amy nodded. "I'll tell her, but if she pushes, do what's best for the company. I trust you to make the right call." She held my hand for a moment before realizing and pulling back. We promoted Jerry to help with daily operations, and Ralph took on more of my duties. Since I was working half days, Debbie became Ralph's assistant. I knew something was up when Greg invited me to lunch on Sunday. Both Debbie and Maria were pregnant. Debbie was 7.5 months along, and Maria was 5.5 months. During a quiet meal, I finally asked, "What's going on?" The women left, and the boys hesitated before telling me the issue. "Dad, Mom is in bad shape. She lost her job, caught her husband cheating, and her house is in foreclosure. Can we help her? Greg explained they had found her an apartment and would cover the first year's rent and utilities, while Jerry would add her to his phone plan. Then Jerry added, she needs a job. Gail's assistant just quit, and we think she'd be a good fit. Gail might be more polite since she's our mom. I didn't like the idea, but reluctantly agreed. Fine, but keep her away from me. If she causes problems, she's out. The boys were relieved. Thanks, Pop. You won't even know she's there. Maria and Debbie hugged me, clearly happy with my decision. Maria said, You're a good man, Papacita. Debbie whispered her thanks, adding that she'd been against letting Rosalind move in with them. I told Amy about it at lunch on Tuesday. She wasn't thrilled. Are you sure? You don't need more stress? I'll manage. She's their mother, and Gail will keep her busy. Amy laughed. Gail wasn't happy, but I used all my HR skills to get her to accept it. She's calmed down a bit since. Rosalind arrived the next week and immediately started complaining. Her apartment was too small, the commute was too long, and she didn't like Gail. Greg and Jerry had a talk with her. We're doing our best, Mom. If you don't like the apartment, you can move, but you'll have to pay your own rent. Gail can be tough, but maybe you can be a good influence. If you can't handle it, we'll help you find another job. That shut her up. She knew she wouldn't find a better job, and the thought of paying her own way didn't appeal to her. I saw her 2 weeks later at a meeting. She'd gained some weight, had shorter hair, but still had those striking blue eyes. She greeted me. Zach, how are you? I'm fine, Roz. How have you been? She didn't like being called Roz, but she kept calm. I've had better days. Thanks for your help. It means a lot to me and the boys. So, how do you like being a rich business owner? A bit different from what we imagined years ago. I smiled. Didn't expect a crowd of grandkids either. Can't wait to meet our grandsons. Before I could say more, Amy walked over and put her hand on my arm. There was some silent tension between her and Rosalind, like a mental standoff. Amy then said, Time to start the meeting, Zach. Let's keep it short. I want to try that new Mexican place for lunch. She addressed Rosalind with a dismissive, Rosalind! And I saw Rosalind tense up. Trying to lighten things, I said, Let's get to business. I'll see you at Jerry's house for lunch on Sunday. Amy gripped my arm tighter when I mentioned it, and I began wondering, was she jealous? During lunch, I caught Amy's eye a few times. She asked, What, do I have food on my blouse? No, just a question. Do we still contribute to the Giles Center? If so, can you get me 2 tickets to Jersey Boys? She nodded. I'm sure I can arrange that. Great. Now a business question. If I take an employee as a date, would that be an issue? She looked serious. I wouldn't recommend it. Relationships with employees can lead to trouble, especially if they end badly. Don't mix business and personal life, Zach. I pretended to be disappointed. Too bad. I was hoping you'd go with me. I know you love musicals. She nearly choked on her tea before recovering. You'll pick me up at 6. We'll have dinner at a nice restaurant I choose, and we'll attend the show as corporate officers, supporting the center. This is strictly a business event, not a date. Clear? So that's a yes? I asked. Yes, now finish your lunch. And don't touch the salt shaker or you won't be able to applaud on Friday. I sent her flowers on Friday with a card reading, In appreciation of a loyal employee. Strictly business, of course. Debbie heard about the flowers and confronted me. Flowers for Amy? You romantic. I tried to downplay it. Just a gesture of appreciation. Before she could say more, Maria burst in. Is it true? She asked Debbie, who nodded. Maria grinned and said, Just so you know, Amy took a half-day vacation, so did we. We're going for a spa treatment and shopping. You better appreciate this. Maria cut me off. Give it up, Pop. She's been into you for about a year. She nearly collapsed when you got sick. Men are clueless. I've seen how you look at her when she's not looking. You want her just as much. Debbie jumped in. Don't screw this up. If you do, Sunday lunches with your grandkids will be a thing of the past. I leaned back and smiled. What happened to my right to privacy? Long gone. Good luck, Papacita. Maria laughed as she and Debbie left. I sent Amy flowers Friday morning with a card that read, In appreciation of a loyal employee. Strictly business, of course. Within 45 minutes, Debbie stormed into my office. Flowers for Amy? You romantic, she teased. I shrugged. Just a gesture of appreciation, no big deal. Maria then charged in, grinning. She took a half-day vacation, Pop. So did we. We're all going for a spa day, followed by shopping. You better appreciate it. I tried to protest, but Maria cut me off. Face it, Pop. She's into you, and you want her too. Debbie added, Don't blow this. You need her, and she needs you. Plus, we could use a better mother-in-law. I gave in. Anything else? Maria checked her watch. Yeah, Greg and Jerry are coming to take you shopping for a new suit. You're not wearing that old stuff. And forget your truck. A limo will pick you up. This non-date is going to cost you, but you're rich. You're welcome. Greg and Jerry walked in just as she finished, and everyone laughed, except me. Let's get you a suit that's actually from this decade, they said. I sat in the limo, feeling like a nervous teenager on a first date. When I got to Amy's house, I admired her well-kept yard. Neat, attractive, and beautiful, just like her. When she opened the door, I was speechless. She wore a perfect little black dress, conservative yet sexy, knee-length, and perfectly fitted to her curves. Her hair was styled in an elegant semi-bun, understated but alluring. She let me squirm for a moment before saying, "For God's sake, Zach, say something." I blurted out, "You're so beautiful." She blushed and giggled. "Thank you. Glad to know your daughters-in-law's efforts weren't wasted. I feel like a princess." I smiled. They're getting upgraded in the will, and I mean it. You're beautiful. Come, princess. Your carriage awaits. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, took my arm, and we headed out. We went to a new Thai restaurant. Amy loved spicy food, but I couldn't handle it as well. She ordered both spicy and mild dishes, feeding me small bites while I wiped my brow. Afterward, we walked to the venue on the warm evening, and I got used to the feel of her hand on my arm. The performance was excellent, and we had some of the best seats in the house. She held my hand the entire time. Afterward, she said, "Thank you so much for tonight. I loved it." "Me too. Too bad it's over," I replied. She stopped. "Over? Who said that? I'm keeping you up past your bedtime, and if you're lucky, I might tuck you in." I blushed, and she laughed. We went to a club that catered to our age group, with a Beatles tribute band playing. She excused herself, and when she returned, her hair was down for the first time, long and beautiful. We sipped drinks and enjoyed the music. She was itching to dance, so I asked, "Wanna?" and she dragged me onto the floor. I wasn't great at dancing, but the slow dances made up for it. She pressed close to me, and we took breaks for me to catch my breath. At one point, her friends Jerry and Sky stopped by. Sky's ankle hurt, so I asked Jerry to dance with Amy. She looked at me, and I nodded, watching her dance happily. After a few fast songs, they returned when a slow one began. "Thank you," she said. "Most men would be jealous," I smiled. "They're your friends, and I want you to have fun. But if it were a stranger, I'd expect you to say no. If you're with me, you're with me." She giggled. "I'm with you, honey." We had coffee with them afterward, and they gave us a card for their dance studio. Before we left, we signed up for lessons. In the limo, I told her, "You don't need lessons. I used to teach part-time. It'll be fun, and dancing with the same partner makes you better. Plus, it'll get you in shape, better than bowling," she said with a smile. I didn't mess things up by trying to come in after walking Amy to her door. I did get a few nice kisses, which was enough for now. On Sunday, before Rosalind arrived, the girls teased me, and the guys asked if I'd scored, while their wives playfully scolded them. When Rosalind arrived and saw the smiles, she asked, "What's everyone so happy about?" Jerry grinned and said, "Pop went on his first date in over 2 years and had a great time." It wasn't entirely true, but no one corrected him. Rosalind didn't seem amused, which dampened the mood until Ashley, their 2-year-old, woke up and lightened the atmosphere. Rosalind noticed Ashley's raccoon toy and commented, "How cute! It looks familiar." Jerry explained, "It's from our company. We make them near the shirt factory and sell them online and in select stores. We've sold quite a few." Rosalind rolled her eyes. "Great, more money for you." Jerry, clearly offended, explained, "Actually, it's a non-profit foundation. Every dollar after cost goes to the Wounded Warrior Foundation to help disabled veterans with things like ramps, guide dogs, and housing modifications." I wished he hadn't mentioned it. We didn't do it for the recognition. It all started when Jerry's best friend, who lost both legs in Afghanistan, needed help. We built ramps for his house, and it led to the idea of creating the foundation. Gail insisted we keep it separate from the business so it wouldn't affect her earnings. Bob, Jerry's friend, now works for us and oversees donations. Rosalind apologized, and the rest of the afternoon went smoothly. On Monday, I received an email outlining the events I'd be attending to represent the company. Fridays and Saturdays would be busy for a while. I was still working half days and considering making it permanent. Amy joined me and Mavis for lunch, but didn't bring up the weekend. She asked if I'd seen the memo about more community involvement, which I had. When Amy kissed me goodbye and called me honey, Mavis's eyes widened, and she immediately pounced. "So you and Amy? About time. She loves you, you know. I raised my hands. We're just friends. No one's talking marriage. Mavis gave me a look. Uh-huh. Well, when that wedding happens, I'll be sitting on the groom's side. Later, Mavis hinted that she and the girls were working on something but wouldn't tell me what. On Friday, she made sure Amy was with me for lunch, and I knew something was up. After lunch, Mavis invited me to the shop, where the girls were grinning. You told us to experiment, so we did, Mavis said. Get ready for a fashion show. The fashion show was mostly grandchildren, ranging from 8 months to 6 years, all wearing clothes with our logo. I'd thought about a children's line before, but never had time to develop it. Mavis knocked me to it, and I was impressed. The designs were clever, like a jumper on the 8-month-old with a raccoon in diapers and a dress on a 6-year-old featuring a mother raccoon with her babies. Debbie's daughter Ashley wore red overalls with raccoon heads on the bib. We introduced the baby raccoon line online, and it sold out in 2 weeks. Everyone loved it, except Gail, who stormed into my house while Amy and I were having lunch, furious. "You a-hole, I'm the designer," she yelled. We were stunned. I tried to reason with her. "No one's undermining you. I asked about a kids' line 2 years ago and you focused on jeans. Now feel free to design as much as you want." She ranted some more and left. Amy sighed. She's losing it. Her husband's spending money they don't have, and she can't say no. He knows she has millions, but doesn't understand the difference between working millions and spending millions. Worse, he talked her out of a prenup. I was shocked. There's a clause in our agreement that requires a prenup to protect the business. What was she thinking? Meanwhile, things between Amy and me progressed nicely. We attended concerts, plays, and sporting events, including races. Will was winning consistently and had a shot at Rookie of the Year in NASCAR. We expanded our monogramming and shirt factories to keep up with demand, and Forbes featured us on the cover as a true American success story. As Amy and I grew closer, Gail's marriage began to deteriorate. I could sense trouble coming. We attended the annual picnic at the shirt factory. The food was great, and the employees, mostly women, competed fiercely in the dessert contest. Prizes ranged from $50 to $250, and the winner was a coconut cake. The local mayor and county commissioners judged the contest, and the event made the local papers, along with a few photos of Amy and me goofing around. One photo showed me smearing cake on her face, and another caught her kissing me in revenge. The caption identified us as the company's owner and his wife, which the kids found amusing. At the hotel afterward, I was surprised when the clerk gave Amy and me key cards to the same room. Before I could protest, she hurried me along. I got tired of waiting. If I left it to you, we'd be in walkers before anything happened. Now don't screw this up. It had been a long, dry spell, and Amy made up for lost time that night. I managed 2 performances and a third at 6 a.m. The dance lessons had definitely helped. Amy outshone both my ex-wives in every way, throwing herself completely into our time together. At 50, Amy was still trim and beautiful. She made me wait in the living room while she changed, and when she finally emerged, she was wearing a sheer teddy robe and high heels. She twirled, teasing me. "Do you like this?" she asked. Once I regained my speech, I said, "You're beautiful, but it would look even better off you." She giggled. "Then it's only fair you take it off." We made love again, and afterward, I held her until she fell asleep. The next morning, we showered together and made it to breakfast with the family. Debbie teased Amy, saying she was glowing, while Greg joked that I looked like I didn't get enough sleep. They all laughed, but I surprised them by announcing we were staying a few more days. I wanted to visit the toy factory and spend more time with Amy. Mission accomplished. On the flight home, I asked, "How long until you move in?" Amy smiled, taking my hand. "I plan to spend a lot of time in your bed, but I'm not moving in right away. We need to make sure everything's right. And just so you know, I'm an old-fashioned marriage kind of woman." "Does that scare you?" I replied. "The only thing that scares me is not being the one you want." She held my hand for the rest of the flight. The first night home without her was rough. I kept waking up, reaching for her. The next day, we struggled through lunch with Mavis, who quickly caught on. Later, Amy promised to bring a suitcase over, just in case. She decided to stay more often. A week later, Rosalind unexpectedly showed up at my office. She wanted to talk, but I told her to get to the point. After some fidgeting, she finally began reminiscing about our past and asked if we could start over. I cut her off, reminding her of her affair, the hurtful things she said, and how she tried to screw me over in the divorce. I told her that too much had happened and that we couldn't go back. I advised her to be grateful for what she had. Before I could say more, Amy walked in and coolly acknowledged Rosalind. "Lunchtime, honey. Should we have Mexican delivered to the house later so we can relax?" Rosalind sat speechless, and I couldn't help but enjoy it. Taking Amy's hand, I said, "Roz and I were just talking about old times, but I'll save the rest for another day. See you Sunday." We left before Rosalind could react. At lunch, Amy noticed the look on my face. "What's on your mind?" "Everyone knows we're together. I knew she was in your office as soon as your door closed. She needs to learn I don't share. If she thinks otherwise, she needs to find a new playground. I protect what's mine." I grinned. "So, I'm yours?" Her expression softened. "Yes, you've been mine since the hospital when I realized I was falling for you. Can you handle that?" "I'm out of my league, but I'll spend as long as it takes to make you happy." She ran to the restroom in tears, but her kiss when she returned told me I hadn't messed up. I started looking for a ring while she talked about redecorating. I told her anything was fine as long as she left my office alone. We were both happy. 2 weeks later, while I was browsing honeymoon brochures, my secretary called. "There's a woman here who says she's your wife." I was confused. Everyone knew Rosalind by now, and Amy hadn't said yes yet. I thought it was a joke until Kathy walked in. "Hi, Zach. Surprised?" she asked, dressed to impress. "More like disappointed. Why are you here?" Her smile faded. "I wanted to apologize. Remember my letter?" "I never read past the first line." "Why?" she asked, trying to stay composed. "Because I was in too much pain. I loved you for 6 years, but then I found out you'd been sleeping with clients for commissions. That's what some people call being paid for sex." She struggled to control her temper. "What do you want, Kathy?" She admitted she was broke, having sold her house to keep her business afloat, but it failed anyway. Rumors about her spread, and she lost clients. Now she had no money left and asked for help. Part of me felt some satisfaction, but another part felt pity. I wrote her a check. "This is for the good years we had, but you need to leave town. I'm proposing to my girlfriend today, and I love her more than I thought possible. I'll try to remember our good times." Her eyes widened at the check, but I cut her off when she tried to thank me. "Just take it. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't betrayed me. Your actions pushed me to find success." She asked for a goodbye hug, but I refused. "No, don't ask why. You won't like the answer." Just then, Amy walked in. "Hi, honey, I just need—" She saw Kathy. "Sorry, I'll come back." I took her hand. No need to wait. Miss Myers was just leaving. I guided Amy out of the room, leaving Kathy behind for good. As soon as we turned the corner, Amy pulled me against the wall, kissing me passionately. "I know who she is," she said. I started to explain, but she put her hand on my lips. "No need. I can be jealous and you're mine." "No more ex-wives I don't know about?" I shook my head. "No." "Good. I trust you, but you're too soft-hearted. It's a good thing I'm here to keep you in line. Now, don't you have something to ask me?" It didn't go exactly as I'd imagined, but I got down on one knee and took out the ring from my pocket. People were passing by, secretaries and assistants heading to lunch, floor managers carrying paperwork. They all stopped and stared. "As you said, I'd be lost without you. I think I need a little more supervision, and the only way to get that is by having you with me forever. Amy, love of my life. It took me 2 tries, but I believe I found the woman I was meant to be with. Please, baby, marry me." It wasn't the romantic speech I had hoped for, but I got my point across. I think everyone in the hall was holding their breath as she knelt to my level. "Yes," she said. Plain, simple, and exactly the word I wanted to hear more than anything in my life. People clapped and cheered, but neither of us noticed. We stayed on the floor, kissing for nearly 5 minutes, long enough for the kids to come running down the hall. Maria and Debbie pulled Amy up, and the 3 of them hugged, dancing in a circle. The boys just stood there, grinning. "Stop smirking and help an old man up," I told them. They pulled me to my feet, and the girls grabbed me while Amy hugged Jerry and Greg. Within 40 minutes, the news had spread across both plants. An hour later, Mavis called. "Remember, I sit on your side of the church," she reminded me. I wished I could have seen her face. "You won't be sitting much. Since my parents have passed, you'll be the mother of the groom." She couldn't speak, so she hung up. The date was set, and Amy had moved into my house full-time. We had a long talk about the future. "I think I'm going to retire. The boys are doing well, and Ralph will still be around to guide them. I'll stay on as CEO, but only step in if they hit a deadlock or need advice." "If you retire, I retire," she said. "All right." "Please, honey," she teased. Like I'm going to let you wander around alone. My new full-time job will be keeping an eye on you. Everyone was thrilled about the engagement, except Gail. She hadn't been happy about much lately. She finally put an end to her husband's reckless spending and told him to get a job if he wanted extra money. He had quit working the day after they got married. He exploded in anger, withdrew as much as he could from their accounts, and left. Then he sued for divorce, asking for alimony and half of her share of the company. Barry did his job. He brought up the partnership and corporation papers that clearly excluded the business from being community property. It was a gray area, but Barry made it clear he could drag things out for years, and her husband would be paying his own fees unless a lawyer took the case on contingency. Barry had a solid reputation, and most lawyers were hesitant. In the end, Gail had to pay him $1.5 million to make him go away. Gail came out to our house for lunch with Amy and me. She looked exhausted and frustrated. "I want out of the company," she said bluntly. "I want to take the jean business and the brand. You can have the rest. Can we work something out?" That night, Amy and I discussed it. She said it wasn't her decision, but I reminded her that we were going to be life partners, and every choice from now on would affect both of us. We consulted Barry, who brought in an independent firm to appraise the business. In the end, we split it the way Gail proposed. She took the jean company and kept the Lardic brand. I had to pay her $2 million in cash to buy out her remaining equity. Amy tried to convince Gail to stay, but Gail was determined. I've learned a lot. It's time for me to move on and follow my own vision. After the paperwork was signed, Gail closed the factory and moved her business to China, leaving the locals devastated. I was furious, but there was nothing I could do. What I could do, however, was buy the equipment and restart under a new brand. Amy came up with our new logo, Livin' Large, featuring 2 big red L's on the pocket. We updated our website, sent out memos, and posted on YouTube to explain the change without bad-mouthing Gail, though people figured it out. Gail thrived for 3 years before selling her company to a Chinese syndicate and opening a design house in LA. Meanwhile, innovation thrived in our company, and Maria came up with a new idea, working with Mavis on the Punk Raccoon line. Instead of the familiar cute logo, the raccoon had black bat-like wings and red eyes with skeletal outlines. We launched hoodies and tees using kids from the community to spread the word. Amy and I eventually married, and I met her son, who had just graduated from college. We brought him into the business, with Greg and Jerry helping him along. Rosalind remarried and moved away, which, while unspoken, brought relief to the boys. Sunday dinners have become big family gatherings. Amy and I are mostly retired, attending only a monthly board meeting. Our honeymoon was a world cruise, and we loved it so much that it's now an annual tradition, taking the grandkids along to give the parents a break. Life has been good. As for Mavis, she retired for 6 months, then called me one day. "Do you know who Ozzy Osbourne is?" she asked. "Yes, Mavis." "Good, because I'm quoting him. Retirement sucks. When can I come back?" I laughed and told her, "As soon as you can walk through the door." She's still going strong.
I was born into affluence. My father was a successful construction entrepreneur, and being an only child, I had the luxury of his full support. However, my beautiful and kind mother fell ill with a severe disease, and after battling it for 2 years, she passed away when I was just 9 years old. 2 years later, my father remarried his new wife, being only 15 years older than me. Can you imagine? She was just 26. People usually wait at least 3 years before remarrying after the death of their spouse, but I guess my father was in a hurry. Perhaps he was looking for a new mother to care for his young son. Looking back, I suppose his wealth made it easier for him to attract a younger wife. My stepmother was young and pretty, standing at 5'6", and was also very kind. My father seemed to enjoy his newlywed life with her. As I grew older, I began to realize how beautiful she was, almost as beautiful as a celebrity. I could say that my fairly uneventful adolescence was due to her kindness and care. I got accepted into a prestigious university, and my father's business continued to prosper. Although I didn't need to work for money, my father advised me that it would be a good experience to do some part-time work, so I worked on a construction site during the holidays, mixing cement with water. The wages I earned felt incredibly valuable after a hard day's work. One day, I bought a watermelon with my wages and gave it to my stepmother. She patted me on the back gently, which somehow made me blush. We lived happily as a family. After serving in the military, I was waiting to return to school while working part-time. Then one day, I came home to find my father's belongings scattered about the living room. My stepmother was crying, and when I asked her what happened, she told me that my father had cheated on her. In her anger, she had thrown all of his clothes from the wardrobe into the living room. My father left the house, claiming that my stepmother was overly attached, since their daughter was already 10 years old. My stepmother was left alone to raise her, while my father agreed to provide only the necessary living expenses. I was angry at my father for betraying his young wife. I wanted to comfort my stepmother, so I started buying her nice meals with the money I earned from my part-time job, and also gave her some pocket money. Despite the circumstances, my stepmother never lost her gentle smile and took good care of me and my sister. I was busy after returning to school, and my father's separation period just seemed to extend. Looking at my father's life, I decided not to date for a while and focused on studying. As my sister grew older and her tuition fees increased, my stepmother had to contact my father for additional support. Occasionally, I saw her sigh and sit down in exhaustion. One day, I suggested that we order some late-night snacks. My stepmother ordered chicken and beer. My sister said she was tired and went to bed, leaving my stepmother and me at the dining table. As we shared stories and drank, she started crying, saying that my father hadn't contacted her except for when he sent money, that he had betrayed her. Despite the 20-year age difference, that he didn't even ask about his daughter, and that just sending money doesn't make him a father. I gently patted my stepmother's slender shoulders, comforting her, saying, "Stepmother, Dad will come back someday. Let's live well until then." She had too much to drink and went to her room to sleep. I was about to go to my room after cleaning up when my stepmother softly called out to me, "Son, I've felt so lonely. Things were good when your father and I first got married, but after we had our daughter, he only had eyes for her. I was always complimented for my youthful looks, but your father began to distance himself from me. During that time, you were growing up so well, buying me delicious food. even giving me pocket money from the earnings of your part-time job. I'm grateful. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I started to see you as a man. I've wanted to confess my feelings for a while now, but I've been too shy. This isn't drunk talk. I'm confessing to you with the help of alcohol. Can you be my man tonight? She asked. I too was a bit drunk, and her confession seemed to make things fall into place. I must admit, I had often fantasized about my stepmother. That night, I agreed to be with her. We made love, and my stepmother, who was in a man's arms after nearly 3 years, began to sob. I told her not to cry, that I would comfort her and help her forget her resentment towards my father. From then on, when my sister was at school and I had no classes, my stepmother and I had our intimate moments. We made love in the master bedroom, drove around in her car, visited gourmet restaurants. To others, we may have looked like a couple of a similar age, rather than a stepmother and stepson. Seeing her leaning on my arm, I felt content. Our relationship lasted for about a year, and I graduated and found a job. I rented a studio apartment near my workplace, but I spent 3 nights a week at her place, fearing she might feel lonely. I gave her all of my first salary. I confess, I visited home more often because of my relationship with her. On my birthday, she prepared a grand dinner, and my sister gave me a shirt as a gift, making it a memorable day. That night, my sister went to bed early again, and my stepmother, dressed up specially, spent the night with me. Then one day, my father came back home. My stepmother accepted his apology and decided to take him back. She thanked me for the wonderful time we had and suggested that we should go back to being just stepmother and son. She also insisted that our secret should be taken to the grave. The reason, I believe, was because I wasn't earning as much as my father. I was barely making ends meet, paying for my living expenses and saving a bit. With my sister's tuition fees increasing, my father's return was a lifeline my stepmother couldn't afford to lose. My parents looked awkward together, but seemed to be trying to mend their relationship, and all I could do was watch. I stopped visiting home except for holidays and birthdays. I occasionally exchanged formal greetings with my stepmother, but that was about it. Yes, that was good enough for me. And I remember my stepmother with happiness. I'll write a review. My stepmother seemed to be getting along well with my father, and it had been 3 months since I had any interaction with her. She occasionally contacted me, but I avoided meeting her with various excuses. Then one day, just before the end of the workday, I got a call at my office desk. Someone was looking for me, so I hurried out. It was fall, and the wind was gently blowing. My stepmother was standing in the lobby of my office. She was wearing a green dress and a cardigan, and she looked stunning. The employees who were leaving work kept stealing glances at her. I introduced her to a coworker, who joked how lucky I was to have such a young and beautiful mother. I always felt this way when I was with my stepmother. She was always beautiful, and I was proud of her. We went to a nearby restaurant and ordered steak, pasta, and salad. We also ordered wine, but my stepmother didn't look happy. She asked if I had been doing well and why I was avoiding her calls. I told her that I couldn't be selfish, that it was important for her and my father to get along. So I had no choice but to avoid her calls, even though it hurt me. She said she had been having difficulty eating. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she was constantly nauseous. I asked, could it be related to our relationship? She said she was scared to go to the hospital alone, so she came to see me. She said she was getting along well with my father, but she wasn't sure about his true feelings. He was trying, but he had cheated once, so She couldn't be sure he wouldn't do it again. I felt sorry for her. We quickly finished our meal and rushed to a drugstore that was about to close. I bought a pregnancy test and handed it to her. She said she wanted to see my apartment, so we bought some beer and snacks and went to my place. She looked around my messy apartment and scolded me, saying, "You can't live like this, just because you're a man living alone. No matter how busy you are, you should always keep your place clean." She said she hadn't been able to take the pregnancy test because she was scared of feeling nauseous and missing her period. But she said she would take the test the next morning because it's more accurate in the morning. We started drinking beer. She said, "I missed you so much. Were you surprised when I showed up out of the blue? Please answer my calls. Let's go back to the way we were. Promise?" She looked at me with pleading eyes. Even though I knew what she was worried about, we became one that night. I took her home in a taxi early in the morning and couldn't sleep. When the morning came, I received a text message from her. I took a pregnancy test. "There's nothing to worry about," it said. I can't tell you how relieved I was. We met again that evening, and she told me that she had been to the gynecologist because her periods were irregular and she had gotten a shot. But because she was constantly nauseous, she was advised to go to an internist. She had an endoscopy a few days later and was diagnosed with chronic gastritis. It wasn't as serious as we feared, and we were relieved. Our relationship returned to the way it used to be. Sometimes my stepmother would come to my apartment. Before I got off work and prepare a delicious meal, we would sit across each other and eat, then go to the bedroom and have a good time. One day after work, I walked into my apartment to find my stepmother sitting there with a furious look on her face.